The great hall had never felt smaller. Harry Potter sat at the Gryffindor table, fork suspended halfway to his mouth, watching the woman in pink ascend to the staff table. Dolores Umbridge moved with the careful precision of someone who believed every gesture mattered, every step a declaration. Her cardigan was the color of frosting on a cake no one wanted to eat. The bow in her hair matched perfectly. She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. Hem hem. The sound cut through the ambient noise like a blade through silk. Conversations died. Cutlery stopped clinking. Even the ghosts seemed to pause mid-drift. Dumbledore rose from his seat, his expression carefully neutral. May I introduce our new defense against the dark arts professor and special envoy from the Ministry of Magic, Professor Dolores Umbridge. Scattered applause, mostly from the Slytherin table. Harry didn't clap. Umbridge's smile widened. Thank you, Headmaster. How lovely to be here at Hogwarts. I'm sure we'll all become very good friends. Her voice was high, breathy, sweet as poisoned honey. Harry felt his stomach turn. The Ministry of Magic has always considered the education of young witches and wizards to be of vital importance. She paused, letting the words settle. Recent events have shown us that certain standards have perhaps slipped. That some among us have chosen to spread alarming rumors rather than focus on proper magical education. Harry's hand tightened on his fork. Beside him, Rashran muttered something under his breath. Hermione's face had gone very still. But fear not. Umbridge clasped her hands together, the gesture almost prayerful. The Ministry is here to help, to guide, to ensure that Hogwarts remains a safe, productive environment where students learn appropriate magic, free from dangerous distractions. She sat down. The applause was louder this time, though Harry noticed McGonagall's hands remained in her lap. Dumbledore returned to his feet. Thank you, Professor Umbridge. Now a few start-of-term notices. But Harry had stopped listening. He was staring at the notice board near the entrance, where a piece of parchment had appeared pinned with invisible force. Pink border. Ministry seal. Even from here he could read the header, Educational Decree Number 22. By morning, there would be more. The defense against the dark arts classroom smelled like cats and cheap perfume. Harry filed in with the rest of the fifth years, trying not to breathe too deeply. The walls had been redecorated. Gone were the dark artifacts and dubious teaching aids from previous years. In their place, lace doilies, ceramic plates with painted kittens, and more pink than Harry had ever seen in one place. It was aggressively cheerful. It made his teeth ache. Umbridge stood at the front, hands folded, that smile fixed in place. Good afternoon, class. A few mumbled responses. Harry said nothing. Wands away, please. You won't be needing them today. Hermione's hand shot up. Professor, how can we practice defense without our wands? The smile never wavered. Practice, Miss Granger. Oh. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we must ensure you have a proper theoretical foundation. One cannot run before learning to walk. She flicked her own wand. Textbooks appeared on every desk with a soft thump. Dark Arts Defense: A Return to Basic Principles by Wilbert Slinkhard. Harry opened it. Chapter 1. The Importance of Non-Aggression in Defensive Theory. Ron leaned over. This is mental. Quiet, please. Umbridge's voice remained sweet, but there was steel underneath. Now, I want you to read Chapter 1 and answer the questions at the end. Silently, in your own time. Harry stared at the page. The words swam. Non-aggression, de-escalation, the moral superiority of not engaging. He thought about the graveyard, about Cedric falling, about the green light. His hand trembled slightly. "Professor," Hermione again persistent as always. "The course aims set by the Ministry don't seem to cover any practical defensive application. Surely we should be learning how to actually defend ourselves against what, Miss Granger?" Umbridge tilted her head bird-like. "Against what dangers precisely?" "There are no dangers. The Ministry assures us the wizarding world is perfectly safe." "But 10 points from Gryffindor for arguing with a teacher. Now, read, silently." Harry felt heat rising in his chest. His voice came out before he could stop it. "What about Voldemort?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Umbridge's smile finally cracked. Just for a moment. Then it was back, wider than before, and somehow worse. "Detention, Mr. Potter. My office. 5 o'clock tomorrow. We'll discuss your penchant for attention-seeking lies." "I'm not lying." Another night of detention. "Would you like to make it 3 cha?" Harry's jaw clamped shut. He could feel every eye in the room on him, feel the weight of silence pressing down. Umbridge turned to the blackboard, her voice light again. "Now, as I was saying, Chapter 1. I expect neat handwriting. Presentation matters." Harry bent over his parchment, gripping his quill too tightly. The words on the page blurred. He wasn't reading. He was staring at a single sentence near the bottom. "A responsible witch or wizard trusts the established authorities to protect them." Something in his chest felt like it was cracking. By evening, the notice board had accumulated 3 more educational decrees. Number 23. All student organizations are henceforth disbanded. Any student wishing to reform a group must seek permission from the High Inquisitor. Number 24. Students found in possession of unapproved reading material will face disciplinary action. Number 25. All Owl Post is subject to inspection. Harry stood in front of the board, hands shoved in his pockets, reading them over and over. The High Inquisitor. That was Umbridge now, apparently. Some new position the Ministry had created. More authority. More control. "They can't do this." He turned. Hermione had appeared beside him, her face pale in the torchlight. Ron stood a few steps behind, looking uncomfortable. "They just did," Harry said flatly. "But it's unconstitutional. There are protections procedures. Dumbledore won't let... Dumbledore's not in charge anymore." The words tasted bitter. "Didn't you hear her at dinner? Ministry oversight? Ministry standards. They're taking over." Hermione's mouth opened, closed. She looked at the decrees again, and Harry saw her analytical mind churning, looking for loopholes, for angles, always looking for a way to fix things with logic. Ron cleared his throat. "So what do we do?" Harry didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. Behind them, the castle settled into its evening rhythms. Students filed past, some glancing at the board, most keeping their heads down. The smart ones, the ones who understood which way the wind was blowing. Harry looked at Educational Decree number 22 again. All students will submit to questioning by the High Inquisitor when requested. Failure to comply will result in expulsion. The words were very precise, very legal, very final. He thought about detention tomorrow, about Umbridge's smile, about that textbook full of lies. Something had shifted at Hogwarts. The walls felt closer, the shadows deeper. The very air tasted different, like the moment before a storm when everything goes still and waiting. Harry turned away from the bored shoulders, tight hands still in his pockets. Ron and Hermione followed without speaking. They walked through corridors that had never felt quite so much like cages. In his office high above the grounds, Albus Dumbledore stood at his window looking out over the darkened lake. The water was black glass reflecting nothing. Behind him, Fawkes shifted on his perch, a soft rustle of feathers. "She's settling in quickly," Dumbledore murmured. The portraits on the walls said nothing. They'd learned over centuries when silence was wisdom. Dumbledore's hands were clasped behind his back. His expression was unreadable. He was thinking about authority, about systems, about the way power could be wielded like a scalpel or a club, about the difference between leadership and control, about the thin line between protection and oppression. He sighed very quietly and returned to his desk. There was nothing to be done tonight. The decrees were legal. Umbridge's appointment was official. The ministry had moved its pieces, carefully covered every angle. For now, all he could do was watch and wait and trust that his students, his brave, foolish, brilliant students, would find their own way through the darkness. They always had before. Far below, in the Department of Mysteries, something else was happening. The room was circular, black-walled, filled with doors. 12 of them, identical, unmarked. In the center, an unspeakable in purple robes stood perfectly still, wand extended, muttering an incantation that hadn't been spoken aloud in 300 years. They were testing boundaries, conceptual boundaries, the places where magic touched the edges of what magic could be. It was delicate work, dangerous work, the kind of work that required absolute precision, absolute focus. The air began to shimmer. The unspeakable frowned. This wasn't the expected result. The shimmer should have been uniform, controlled, a perfect sphere of distorted space. Instead, it was fracturing, splintering, spreading in patterns that looked almost like cracks in ice. They tried to pull back the spell. Too late. The shimmer collapsed inward, then expanded outward, and for one impossible moment, the room contained something that shouldn't exist. A space between spaces. A gap in the logic of the world itself. The unspeakable stumbled backward, wand falling from nerveless fingers. In the gap, nothing moved. Nothing existed. It was simply there and not there, both and neither. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it sealed. The air returned to normal. The room was just a room again. The unspeakable stood frozen, breathing hard, staring at the spot where the impossible had briefly been. They would file a report in the morning, describe what they'd seen in careful clinical language, recommend further study with additional safety protocols. They would not mention the other thing they'd noticed. The way the air just before the gap sealed had seemed to twist. Not randomly, but deliberately. As if something had stepped through, as if something had chosen to arrive. The unspeakable picked up their wand with shaking hands and left the room, locking the door behind them with 7 different spells. They did not look back. In the silence that followed, one of the 12 doors opened. Just a crack. Just enough for a sliver of light from the corridor beyond to spill across the black floor. Then it closed again very softly, as if nothing had happened at all. But something had. The castle had one more visitor now. One more variable in an equation that was already unbalanced. And in her office, hanging pictures of kittens on every available surface, Dolores Umbridge hummed to herself and prepared for tomorrow's classes, completely unaware that the game she thought she controlled had just changed in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The pieces were in motion. The pink decrees were only the beginning. Harry's hand hurt. Not the dull ache of overused muscles or the sharp sting of a fresh cut. This was something else. Something that burned with each heartbeat, steady and relentless, like his skin was trying to reject the words carved into it. I must not tell lies. He sat in Umbridge's office, the scratching of the quill, the only sound besides his own carefully controlled breathing. The black quill. That's what she'd called it when she handed it to him, her smile never wavering. You won't need ink, dear. She'd been right about that. The words appeared on the parchment in his own blood and simultaneously etched themselves into the back of his hand. Over and over. Line after line. I must not tell lies. I must not tell lies. I must not tell lies. Umbridge sat at her desk, sipping tea from a cup decorated with painted cats, watching him with that fixed, pleasant expression. She hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. Didn't need to. The quill said everything. Harry kept his face blank. Gave her nothing. He had learned that much at the Dursleys. Don't react, don't flinch, don't give them the satisfaction. The pain was just pain. He could survive pain. What made his stomach turn was the legality of it all. This wasn't Snape taking points unfairly, or Filch threatening medieval punishments he'd never be allowed to use. This was sanctioned. Official. Umbridge had shown him the ministry authorization before they'd started a neat little document with Fudge's signature at the bottom. Approved disciplinary measures for cases of persistent disruption and defiance. She was torturing him with paperwork. I think that's enough for tonight. Umbridge's voice was bright, cheerful. You may go, Mr. Potter. Same time tomorrow, I think. We'll continue until you've learned your lesson. Harry set down the quill carefully. His hand was shaking slightly. He refused to acknowledge it. Yes, Professor. Oh, and Mr. Potter. She smiled wider. Do try to remember everything I do is for your own good. The ministry cares very much about your welfare. Harry left without answering. The corridor outside was cold and empty. He leaned against the wall for a moment, just breathing, looking at the fresh scars on his hand. I must not tell lies. The words were still visible, red and raw. They'd fade by morning, probably, just in time to be carved fresh tomorrow night. He started walking back to Gryffindor Tower, hand curled into a fist in his pocket. Behind him, Umbridge's door clicked shut, with a sound like a trap closing. The Department of Mysteries had been sealed for 3 days. Security protocols, the memo said. Routine maintenance. Nothing to worry about. The purple-robed unspeakables went about their business in other parts of the building, conducting other experiments, cataloging other impossibilities. No one talked about the incident in the circular room. No one except the one who'd been there. The unspeakable designation. Croaker, though few knew the name, sat in a small office 2 floors down, writing the same paragraph for the 5th time and hating every word. How did you describe nothing not darkness, not void, not absence? Nothing. A space where the concept of space had briefly failed to apply, where cause and effect had looked at each other like strangers meeting by chance. Croaker's hand cramped around the quill. The parchment was already littered with crossed-out attempts. At 21:47 hours during a controlled test of conceptual boundary manipulation, an anomaly occurred. No, too vague. The spell matrix collapsed inward, creating a temporary no. That implied understanding. There was no understanding. For approximately 1.3 seconds, the fundamental logical structure underlying physical manifestation within the test chamber appeared to... Croaker stopped. read it back, crossed it out. There was no appeared to. It had. The framework that held reality together like mortar between bricks had cracked just for an instant. And in that crack, something had moved. Or someone. Croker wasn't sure. The memory had the quality of a half-remembered dream, vivid but impossible to examine directly. Tall, fair, present in a way that made everything else feel like background noise. And then gone. Or not gone. Just elsewhere. Croker set down the quill and rubbed tired eyes. 3 days of searching. 3 days of running every detection spell in the department's considerable arsenal. 3 days of finding absolutely nothing wrong. The room was stable. The doors were secure. The instruments showed no residual magical signature, no lingering dimensional instability, no trace evidence that anything unusual had occurred at all. Except Croker had been there, had seen it. The report would be filed, marked inconclusive, added to the vast archive of magical phenomena that defied explanation. Eventually, someone would try the experiment again more carefully this time with better safeguards. Eventually. For now, Croker signed the memo authorizing the room's reopening, sent it to administration, and tried not to think about the way the air had twisted, like a door opening in a place where doors couldn't exist, like something choosing to arrive. Lucifer Morningstar stood in a corridor he didn't recognize, wearing an expression of mild annoyance. This was not where he'd intended to be. He'd been walking through creation, not the mortal plane, but the interstitial spaces between the quiet places where concepts lived before they became concrete, when the path had simply ended. Not blocked, not closed, ended. As if someone had erased a section of road and forgotten to put up a sign. He'd stepped forward anyway, out of curiosity more than intent, and found himself here. Wherever here was. The corridor was stone ancient, lit by torches that burned without consuming their fuel. Magic, then. Not the kind he was familiar with. This had a different flavor, more structured, more rule-bound. Less a force of nature, and more a practiced discipline. Interesting. Lucifer began walking. His footsteps made no sound on the flagstones. He wasn't trying to be quiet. Silence simply seemed appropriate. The corridor opened into a larger space, a hall of some kind. Long tables, high ceiling, the lingering smell of food and adolescence. A school, perhaps, though the architecture suggested something older, more Gothic. He paused at a notice board covered in parchment announcements. His eyes tracked across the words with the same detached interest he might give to an unfamiliar language. Educational Decree Number 22. Educational Decree Number 23. Educational Decree Number 24. Rules. So many rules, all stamped with official seals, all written in that particular style of bureaucratic language that existed to obscure rather than clarify. Lucifer had seen it before in countless variations, across countless worlds. The vocabulary changed. The intent never did. Control masquerading as protection. Oi, you there. Lucifer turned. A translucent figure was floating toward him, dressed in motley bells jingling. A ghost, apparently. Though not like any ghost he'd encountered before, this one radiated mischief rather than melancholy. You're not supposed to be here. The ghost Peeves, according to the way he introduced himself, with a manic cackle bobbed up and down. New teacher, new student, new target for Peevesy. Lucifer regarded him with the expression of someone examining an unusual insect. None of those. Then what are you passing through? Peeves squinted, or tried to. His face wasn't quite solid enough for proper expressions. You don't look like you're passing through. You look like you're staying. Got that standing still look about you. Appearances, Lucifer said mildly, are negotiable. Before Peeves could respond, footsteps echoed from a nearby staircase. Lucifer turned toward the sound with the same calm curiosity he'd given everything else. A woman emerged, tall, severe, wearing dark robes and an expression that could cut glass. She stopped when she saw him, her eyes narrowing fractionally. I don't believe we've met. Her voice was crisp, controlled. I am Professor McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress, and you are... Lucifer inclined his head slightly. Lost. Lost. She repeated the word as if testing it for veracity. You're standing in Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. How precisely did you become lost here? I walked through a door that shouldn't have existed. He gestured vaguely. It seemed rude not to see where it led. McGonagall's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. A subtle tension, like a drawn bow. What door, where? Difficult to say. It's not there anymore. They regarded each other in silence. Peeves had gone very quiet, drifting near the ceiling, watching with uncharacteristic stillness. McGonagall's hand had moved fractionally toward her wand, though she hadn't drawn it. I think, she said carefully, you'd better come with me. The headmaster will want to speak with you. Lucifer considered this. He could refuse, could simply turn and walk back the way he'd come, find another crack in the structure of this place and slip through. He had no particular obligation to explain himself to anyone, much less the administration of a school he'd stumbled into by accident. But there was something about those notices on the board. Something about the precise, careful language of institutional overreach. Something that reminded him of other times, other places, other people who'd believed rules gave them ownership of truth. Very well, he said. McGonagall's eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise. This way. She led him through corridors that twisted and turned in ways that shouldn't quite work geometrically. Lucifer followed, hands in his pockets, observing. Students passed them, occasionally young faces, tightening with confusion at the sight of a stranger. None spoke. McGonagall's presence seemed to discourage questions. They climbed a spiral staircase. At the top, a door with a brass knocker in the shape of a griffin. McGonagall knocked. Headmaster, there's someone here you should meet. Enter. The voice from inside was aged but warm. The office beyond was cluttered with instruments, books, and sleeping portraits. Behind a large desk sat an elderly man with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles. His eyes were bright, curious, and entirely too knowing. Albus Dumbledore rose from his chair, studying Lucifer, with the expression of someone examining an unexpected but not unwelcome puzzle piece. Good evening, Dumbledore said pleasantly. I don't believe I caught your name. Lucifer met his gaze directly. I didn't give it. Ah, a small smile. Well, would you care to... A pause. The office seemed to hold its breath. Even the portraits had stopped pretending to sleep. Lucifer Morningstar. The name settled into the room like a stone into still water. Ripples, but no splash. Dumbledore's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. That's quite a name. It's mine. And you're here because... Accident. There was a flaw. I stepped through it. A flaw. Dumbledore repeated it thoughtfully. In what precisely? Lucifer gestured vaguely, encompassing everything and nothing. The framework. The structure underlying manifest reality. Something cracked. Very briefly, I happened to be nearby. McGonagall made a small sound that might have been suppressed alarm. Dumbledore simply nodded, as if this was a perfectly reasonable explanation. I see. And now that you're here, what do you intend to do? Leave, eventually. Lucifer's tone was matter-of-fact. But the way I came is closed. I'll need to find another exit. That may take some time. Time, Lucifer said, is flexible. Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Mr. Morningstar, I find myself in an unusual position. I cannot verify your story. I cannot assess your intentions. And yet, I am not inclined to call you a liar. Because I'm not lying. Yes, I rather thought not. Dumbledore paused. However, Hogwarts is currently under scrutiny. The Ministry of Magic has taken an active interest in our operations. There is a representative on staff whose job is specifically to identify and address irregularities. Dolores Umbridge. Stens, Lucifer said the name without inflection. I saw her decrees. You're well informed. I read. McGonagall cleared her throat. Headmaster, if the Ministry learns we have an unregistered individual of unknown origin on school grounds, they will demand answers we cannot provide. Dumbledore finished. Yes. Which presents us with a dilemma. Lucifer watched them both with the detached interest of someone observing a particularly intricate game. You're debating whether to turn me over to your authorities. We're debating, McGonagall said sharply, how to handle a situation that could endanger this entire school. If I were dangerous, Lucifer said mildly, you'd already know. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken implications. Dumbledore broke it with a soft chuckle. Quite right. Very well, Mr. Morningstar. I propose a temporary arrangement. You may remain at Hogwarts while you search for your exit. In exchange, you will submit to certain formalities. Paperwork, I'm afraid. Professor Umbridge is quite insistent on proper documentation. You want me to register with your bureaucracy. I want to avoid giving Dolores Umbridge a reason to investigate further. She has quite enough reasons already. Lucifer tilted his head slightly. And if I refuse, then I suspect you'll be discovered anyway, and the situation will become significantly more complicated for everyone involved. Dumbledore's tone remained pleasant. I'm offering you a shield of legitimacy. Temporary, but functional. In exchange for what? Your cooperation. While you're here, you will not interfere with the running of this school. You will not endanger my students. And you will not provide Professor Umbridge with ammunition she might use against us. It was Lucifer recognized a reasonable request, almost elegant in its simplicity. Dumbledore was offering him cover in exchange for neutrality. The problem was that neutrality had never been Lucifer's strong suit. Still, the alternative was tedious. Being hunted, questioned, processed through whatever magical law enforcement this world possessed. He'd experienced bureaucratic persecution before. It was rarely interesting. Very well, Kassain, he said. I accept your terms. McGonagall looked skeptical. Dumbledore simply smiled. Excellent. Minerva, would you mind informing Professor Umbridge that we have a new visiting scholar, someone conducting independent research? I'm sure we can manufacture appropriate credentials. You want me to lie to her? McGonagall's tone was carefully neutral. I want you to provide her with paperwork she can file. The truth is often whatever's written down in my experience. McGonagall's expression suggested she had opinions about that philosophy, but she nodded. I'll prepare the documents. She left robes swishing with suppressed irritation. Dumbledore turned back to Lucifer. A word of advice, if I may. Dolores Umbridge is not a woman to be underestimated. She wields rules like weapons. If you give her cause to examine you too closely, she will find something to object to. She always does. Then I'll endeavor not to give her cause. See that you do. Dumbledore's voice was still pleasant, but there was steel underneath. I protect this school, Mr. Morningstar. All who reside within it. But that protection extends only as far as my ability to shield them from consequence. Don't test its limits. Lucifer met his eyes. Two old beings measuring each other across a desk, cluttered with the detritus of scholarship. Understood, Lucifer said. He meant it too, for now. By morning, Educational Decree number 26 had appeared on the notice board. All visiting scholars and temporary staff must register with the High Inquisitor within 24 hours of arrival. Harry, passing the board on his way to breakfast, barely glanced at it. There was always another decree, another rule, another tightening of the noose. His hand still hurt. He kept walking, not noticing the tall blonde man standing near the entrance, reading the decree with an expression of faint amusement. Not noticing that something new had entered Hogwarts, something that didn't quite fit the framework, something that didn't need to. Dolores Umbridge's office had grown pinker. Minerva McGonagall stood in the doorway, holding a folder of freshly fabricated credentials, trying not to let her distaste show. New plates had appeared on the walls, more cats, more lace. The woman had managed to make institutional authority look like a deranged tea party. Minerva. Umbridge's smile was bright and fixed. How lovely. Do come in. McGonagall entered, keeping her posture rigid. Professional. I have the registration documents you requested. For our visiting scholar. Ah, yes. Umbridge set down her teacup cats again naturally and extended a hand. Let me see. McGonagall passed over the folder. Inside Dumbledore's handiwork, a letter of introduction from a fictional academic institution, a research proposal. Suitably vague references that would check out if anyone bothered to verify them. Which they wouldn't. The magical bureaucracy ran on the assumption that paperwork was truth. Umbridge read slowly, her lips moving slightly. Her expression remained pleasant, but her eyes were sharp, hunting for irregularities. She found none. Dumbledore was thorough. Lucifer Morningstar. Umbridge pronounced each syllable with care. Unusual name. Foreign origin, McGonagall said smoothly. His research focuses on theoretical applications of, I'll want to meet him personally. Umbridge looked up, still smiling. Today, if possible. Any visitor to Hogwarts during this sensitive period requires proper vetting. I'm sure you understand. McGonagall understood perfectly. This was about control, about establishing dominance, about making sure everyone knew who held authority here. Of course, I'll inform him. Excellent. Umbridge made a notation in her ledger. Pink ink. Shall we say 2 o'clock? I do prefer afternoon appointments. The morning light is so harsh. McGonagall left before she said something regrettable. At precisely 2 o'clock, Lucifer knocked on Umbridge's door. The sound was unremarkable, polite, but something about it made the portraits in the corridor shift uneasily in their frames. Enter. The office was exactly as McGonagall had described. Aggressively cheerful, decorated with the aesthetic sensibility of someone who confused abundance with taste. Lucifer surveyed it with the expression of a man examining evidence at a crime scene. Umbridge rose from behind her desk, extending a hand. "Mr. Morningstar, how delightful to finally meet you." He took her hand briefly. Her grip was firmer than expected. A power play. He released it without reaction. "Professor Umbridge." His tone was neutral, giving nothing. "Please sit." She gestured to a chair upholstered in pink chintz. "I do hope you'll forgive the formality, but the ministry requires thorough documentation of all visitors during these troubled times." Lucifer sat. "Troubled times? You haven't heard." Her voice carried calculated surprise. "There have been certain claims about the return of you-know-who. Dangerous rumors spread by unreliable sources. The ministry naturally must take precautions." "Naturally." She watched him carefully. He gave her nothing to read. No agreement, no disagreement. Just polite attention. It seemed to unsettle her, though her smile never wavered. "Now then." She pulled out a fresh piece of parchment. "A few questions, if you don't mind. Standard procedure. Name, origin, purpose of visit, intended duration of stay." She went through them methodically. Lucifer answered each with the precision of someone who understood that bureaucracy was a game with very specific rules. His responses matched the documentation McGonagall had provided exactly. Not too detailed. Not suspiciously vague, just right. Umbridge wrote it all down in her careful script. "And you'll be residing where exactly the headmaster has provided guest quarters." "I see." Another notation. "You understand, of course, that all visitors are subject to Hogwarts regulations. Educational Decree number 26 specifies that temporary residents must comply with the same standards as staff and students." I read the decree. "Good." She set down her quill, folding her hands. "Then we understand each other. Hogwarts is currently undergoing a necessary period of reformation. Certain lax attitudes that were previously tolerated are being corrected. The ministry expects full cooperation from everyone within these walls, including visiting scholars, especially visiting scholars." Her smile sharpened. "We wouldn't want any complications." Lucifer regarded her with the calm interest of someone examining a particularly elaborate mousetrap. "What sort of complications concern you?" "Oh, the usual. Individuals who might encourage student disobedience, who might spread alarming rumors, who might interfere with proper educational protocols." She leaned forward slightly. "I'm sure a man of your obvious intelligence can appreciate the importance of order." "Order has its place." "Indeed it does." She pulled out a new document. "Which brings me to the residence agreement. All visitors must sign acknowledging their understanding of school rules and their commitment to upholding ministry standards." She slid it across the desk. Lucifer picked it up, scanning the text with the attention it deserved. It was standard boilerplate mostly. Acknowledgement of authority, agreement to comply with regulations, acceptance of disciplinary measures for violations. Buried in the middle in slightly smaller text. The signatory agrees not to interfere with the lawful administration of Hogwarts School or to undermine the authority of ministry-appointed officials in the execution of their duties. Clever. Not just agreeing to follow rules, but actively promising not to question them. "This is a loyalty oath," he said. Umbridge's smile didn't falter. "It's a residence agreement. It's a contract binding me to accept your authority without question or challenge. It's a promise not to cause trouble." Her voice remained sweet. "Surely that's not unreasonable. You're a guest here after all. Guests should behave appropriately." Lucifer set down the parchment. I don't sign contracts I haven't negotiated. The temperature in the room dropped fractionally. I beg your pardon. This agreement is one-sided. I accept restrictions on my behavior, and in exchange I receive the privilege of remaining here. That's not a contract. That's a demand. Umbridge's smile had frozen in place. Mr. Morningstar, I think you may be misunderstanding the situation. This isn't a negotiation. This is standard procedure. Then your standard procedure is flawed. They regarded each other across the desk. Umbridge's hand had drifted toward her wand, though she hadn't drawn it. Lucifer remained perfectly still, hands folded in his lap. Let me be clear, Umbridge said, her voice losing some of its saccharine quality. You are here at the Ministry's sufferance. If you refuse to sign this agreement, I am authorized to have you removed from the premises immediately. You could try? The words were soft, almost gentle, but something in them made the air feel heavier. Umbridge's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening me? I'm stating fact. You have no authority over me. You never did. This, he gestured at the document, is an attempt to create authority through paperwork. It won't work. Everyone is subject to ministry authority. No, Lucifer said. They're not. Silence. Heavy and waiting. Umbridge's hand closed around her wand. Mr. Morningstar, I strongly suggest you reconsider your position. I have extensive powers granted by the Ministry to deal with individuals who refuse to cooperate. And I, Lucifer said mildly, have no interest in your power structure. However, he paused. Let the word hang. However, I'm willing to negotiate, not this. He tapped the document. But something mutual. An agreement that binds both parties equally. Umbridge's expression flickered between confusion and suspicion. What are you proposing? A contract, bilateral. I agree not to interfere with the administration of Hogwarts. In exchange, you agree to certain limitations on your own behavior. Limitations. The word came out sharp. I don't need to agree to limitations. I have the law on my side. The law, Lucifer said, is just words on paper. Like this agreement you want me to sign. It has power only because people consent to it. I'm offering you my consent in exchange for yours. This is absurd. This is fair. They stared at each other. Umbridge's grip on her wand had tightened. Lucifer hadn't moved at all. What limitations? She asked finally. Nothing unreasonable. You agree not to use your authority to coerce students into compliance through methods that would constitute torture or cruel punishment. You agree not to suppress information through threats of expulsion or harm. You agree that your power exists to maintain order, not to punish dissent. Umbridge's laugh was high and tight. You're asking me to agree not to discipline students. That's my job. I'm asking you to agree not to torture them. There's a difference. I don't torture anyone. Everything I do is within legal guidelines. Then you should have no problem signing. The logic of it hung between them like a blade. If she refused, she admitted her methods crossed lines she claimed not to cross. If she agreed, she bound herself to standards that would limit her power. It was elegant, vicious, perfectly balanced. Umbridge's smile had vanished entirely. Let me see this contract in writing. Lucifer pulled a piece of parchment from his pocket. Where it had come from was unclear and set it on the desk. The text was already written in neat, precise script. Umbridge read it, her expression growing darker with each line. The contract was short, simple. 2 clauses for him, 2 for her. He would not interfere with the lawful administration of Hogwarts. He would not encourage student disobedience or rebellion. She would not employ methods of discipline that constituted physical or psychological torture. She would not use threats of permanent expulsion or harm to coerce compliance with non-essential rules. At the bottom space for 2 signatures. "This is ridiculous," Umbridge said. "I would never the very suggestion that I would torture students. Then sign it. This would limit my ability to maintain order. It would limit your ability to abuse your position. If you're not planning to do that, it costs you nothing." Her hand trembled slightly, with rage possibly, or recognition. She was trapped by her own rhetoric. She'd spent weeks claiming moral authority, lawful behavior, proper procedure. To refuse this contract was to admit those claims were lies. "If I sign this," she said slowly, "and you break your terms, then I violated a binding agreement. You would have cause to act against me. And if I break mine..." Lucifer's smile was very slight, very cold. "Then the agreement is void, and you lose whatever protection it provided." "Protection from me." The words settled into the room like frost. Umbridge's breathing had gone shallow. She was calculating, weighing options, trying to find the trap, the loophole, the catch. There wasn't one. That was the beauty of it. "Fine." She snatched up a quill. "If it will resolve this absurd situation, I'll sign your ridiculous contract." She signed. Quick, angry strokes. "Dolores Jane Umbridge." Lucifer took the quill from her hand and added his own name beneath hers. The letters seemed to darken as he wrote, ink sinking into parchment like roots into soil. The moment his signature was complete, the contract glowed faintly just for a second and then went dormant again. Umbridge stared at it. What was that? Confirmation. The terms are now binding. Binding how? This is just paper. Nothing is just paper if both parties believe in it. You believe in the power of documentation. So do I. This document now has exactly as much authority as you've granted to every decree, every rule, every policy you've written. No more, no less. He stood picking up the contract. I'll keep this, for reference. Umbridge's face had gone the color of old parchment. You can't, that's not how this works. You signed it willingly. You agreed to the terms. That's exactly how this works. He moved toward the door. I appreciate your time, Professor. I'm sure we'll have a very productive relationship. Get out! Her voice was no longer sweet, no longer controlled, just rage barely contained. Lucifer left, closing the door softly behind him. In the silence that followed, Umbridge sat frozen, staring at the space where the contract had been. Her own signature, her own agreement. She'd signed something she didn't fully understand, bound herself to terms that might limit her power, all because refusing would have shown weakness. She'd been outmaneuvered by paperwork. The irony was almost physically painful. Harry was late to dinner, his hands still aching from that afternoon's detention. The great hall was already full, the noise of conversation washing over him like a wave. He found a seat between Ron and Hermione, not speaking. You all right? Ron asked, eyeing him. Fine. Hermione looked at his hand. Her expression tightened. That's the third night this week. I'm aware. Harry, this isn't right. What she's doing is perfectly legal. His voice was flat. She showed me the authorization. Ministry approved. All proper and official. That doesn't make it acceptable. It makes it unstoppable. Hermione fell silent. She looked like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. At the staff table, Dumbledore was speaking quietly with McGonagall. Neither looked pleased. Between them, a small space had been left, whether by accident or design, where a tall, blond man now sat eating with the mechanical efficiency of someone performing a necessary task. Harry noticed him for the first time. "Who's that?" Ron squinted. "Dunno. New teacher? Visiting scholar?" Hermione said. She'd read the notice that morning. She always read the notices. "Something about research. He just arrived." Harry watched the stranger for a moment. There was something odd about him. Not threatening exactly. Just out of place. Like a piece from a different puzzle jammed into the wrong picture. The man glanced up as if feeling the attention. His eyes met Harry's across the hall. For one brief second, Harry had the strangest sensation, like being seen. Actually seen. Not judged, not analyzed. Just observed with a clarity that was almost uncomfortable. Then, the moment passed. The man returned to his meal. Harry looked away, unsettled in a way he couldn't name. "Weird bloke," Ron muttered. "Yeah," Harry agreed. He didn't think about it again. He had enough to worry about without adding mysterious visitors to the list. His hand hurt. His scar hurt. Everything hurt. He ate his dinner and tried not to think about tomorrow's detention. At the staff table, Lucifer finished his meal in silence, acutely aware that he'd just made the situation significantly more complicated. The contract was binding. He'd made sure of that. Umbridge would be bound by its terms as surely as he was. She couldn't torture students, not with methods that would clearly violate the agreement, without breaking the contract and voiding its protections. The problem was that he'd also bound himself. Non-interference. That was the promise. Don't disrupt the administration. Don't encourage rebellion. He'd made that promise to Dumbledore as well. Different words, same intent. He was trapped by his own agreements. Exactly as he'd intended. Exactly as he needed to be if he wanted to observe without being expelled. But watching children suffer under bureaucratic cruelty while bound by a promise not to interfere, that would be interesting, in the way that all impossible situations were interesting. He stood excused himself with a nod to Dumbledore and left the Great Hall. Behind him, students ate and laughed and worried about homework, unaware that the framework holding their world together had just shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. The Morningstar clause was in effect, and the game had truly begun. The common room fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the threadbare furniture. Most of Gryffindor had gone to bed. Only 3 figures remained huddled in the corner, farthest from the portrait hole, speaking in voices that wouldn't carry. Hermione Granger had that look. The one that meant she'd been thinking. Planning. Working through variables until she'd found a solution. Harry didn't trust that look. It usually meant trouble. "We need to do something," she said, not for the first time. Ron sighed. "We've been over this." "No, listen. Really listen." Hermione leaned forward, her voice urgent but controlled. "Umbridge isn't teaching us anything. Not one practical spell, not one defensive technique. When we leave Hogwarts, we'll be completely unprepared." "Tell that to the Ministry," Harry muttered. His hand ached. The scars from tonight's detention were fresh. The Ministry won't listen, but we can still learn. We just have to do it ourselves. Harry looked at her properly then. "What are you suggesting? A study group, defense practice. We find a space we meet regularly, and we teach ourselves what Umbridge won't." "That's against the rules," Ron pointed out. "Educational Decree number 24. All student organizations disbanded. Need permission from Umbridge to reform. Then we don't ask for permission. The words hung in the air between them. Simple, dangerous. Harry felt something shift in his chest. You want to break the rules. I want to survive. Hermione's eyes were fierce. You saw what happened at the Ministry last year. You know what's coming even if they won't admit it. We need to be ready. And if we get caught, then we get caught. But at least we'll have learned something useful first. Ron was watching both of them, his expression caught between concern and something that might have been excitement. You're serious about this? Completely. Harry thought about detention, about the quill carving lies into his skin, about Umbridge's smile and her sweet voice and the way she'd made torture legal with a signature. He thought about Cedric falling, about Voldemort rising, about the graveyard. Who would teach? He asked quietly. Hermione looked at him. Just looked. Waiting. Understanding hit like cold water. No, absolutely not. Harry, I'm not a teacher. I don't know how to. You fought a basilisk in second year. You produced a corporeal Patronus at 13. You survived the Triwizard Tournament. Hermione's voice was steady, factual. You've done more practical defense than anyone else our age. Probably more than most adults. That doesn't mean I can teach it. It means you're the only one who can. Ron cleared his throat. She's got a point made. Who else knows how to fight the stuff that's actually dangerous, not Umbridge? Not most of the other teachers. You've been there, done it, survived it. Harry wanted to argue, wanted to explain that surviving wasn't the same as understanding, that he'd been lucky more than skilled. That teaching would mean putting himself forward, making himself a target, claiming authority he didn't feel. But looking at Hermione's determined face, at Ron's hopeful expression, he realized it didn't matter what he wanted. They needed this. Hogwarts needed this. And he was the only option they had. If we do this, he said slowly, it stays small, careful, no one who might talk. Hermione's smile was quick and fierce. I've already made a list. Of course she had. The room of requirement appeared on the 7th floor when they needed it most. Harry had heard about it before, a room that became whatever the user required. He'd never tried to find it, never needed to. Now, pacing back and forth in front of a blank wall, thinking desperately about a place to practice defense, he needed it badly. The door materialized like a gift. Inside the room had configured itself perfectly. Open space for dueling practice, cushions for students to sit, bookshelves lined with defense texts, even practice dummies arranged along one wall. Bloody hell, Ron breathed. It's perfect. Hermione was already examining the books, her fingers trailing over spines. This is incredible. Half of these are banned from the library. Harry walked to the center of the room, feeling the space around him. It felt safe, protected, like the castle itself was offering sanctuary. When do we start? Ron asked. Tomorrow, Hermione said. I'll spread the word quietly. Only people we trust. They came in ones and twos, trickling into the room of requirement, with expressions ranging from curious to nervous to grimly determined. Neville Longbottom arrived first, looking uncertain, but resolute. Then the Weasley twins, grinning like they'd been invited to something delightfully illegal. Luna Lovegood drifted in, seemingly unsurprised by everything. More Gryffindors, a few Ravenclaws, Even some Hufflepuffs led by a blonde girl named Hannah Abbott, who looked terrified but showed up anyway. No Slytherins. That would have been pushing it. 28 students total. All of them watching Harry with expressions that made his stomach knot. They expected him to know what to do. He didn't. "Right," he said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "So, thanks for coming. I know this is risky. We wouldn't be here if we didn't think it was worth the risk," Hermione interrupted gently. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Harry swallowed. "Okay, well, the point of this is to learn practical defense. Real defense. Not the theoretical rubbish Umbridge is feeding us." "What will we learn?" a Ravenclaw girl, Cho Chang asked. "Defensive spells, disarming, shield charms, stunning, later maybe Patronuses if we get that far." He paused. "Anything that might actually keep you alive." The room had gone very quiet. The reality of what they were doing settling in. "This isn't a game," Harry continued. "If Umbridge finds out, we'll all be in serious trouble. Possibly expelled. So if anyone wants to leave now, no judgment. This is dangerous." No one moved. Something in Harry's chest loosened slightly. "All right then. Let's start with something basic. Expelliarmus. The disarming charm, pair up." They organized themselves into pairs. Harry walked among them, correcting wand positions, adjusting stances. It felt strange being the one giving instructions, but they listened, they tried. And slowly, hesitantly, wands began flying from hands as the spell took effect. Ron was paired with Neville, being surprisingly patient, as Neville struggled with the wand movement. The twins were showboating naturally, but they knew the spell cold. Hermione was working with a younger Gryffindor, her teaching instincts taking over. Cho approached Harry during a break. "This is good," she said. "What you're doing, it's important." Harry felt heat rising in his face. "It's just practice. It's more than that. It's resistance." She smiled slightly. "Even if we're terrible at it?" "You're not terrible. I haven't successfully disarmed anyone yet. Give it time." She nodded and returned to her partner. Harry watched her go, feeling awkward and pleased in equal measure. Hermione appeared at his elbow. "We need a name." "What?" "For the group. If we're going to be organized, we should have a name, something official. This is meant to be secret." "I know, but it helps. Gives us identity. Makes it real." Harry thought about it. "Defense Association. Too bland." "Then what?" She was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then her eyes lit. "Dumbledore's army? Absolutely not. Think about it. Fudge's worst fear is that Dumbledore is raising an army against the Ministry. We use that fear, turn it into something real. Something they can't control. If they find out we're calling ourselves that, then they'll know we're serious." Harry looked around the room. At students practicing spells they should have learned in class. At people risking expulsion to learn how to protect themselves. At a rebellion forming in the castle's hidden spaces. "Dumbledore's army," he repeated, testing the words. They felt right. "Fine. But don't blame me when this goes catastrophically wrong." Hermione grinned. "I never do." The sessions continued through October, each one building on the last. They learned stunning spells, basic shield charms, how to break curses, how to recognize dark magic before it hit. Harry found himself actually enjoying it, the teaching the progress, watching Neville finally get a spell, right after a dozen attempts, and seeing his face light up with genuine pride. They set up a warning system, enchanted coins that would heat up if someone needed to cancel a session. Hermione's idea, naturally. Practical, clever. The room of requirement became their sanctuary. The one place in Hogwarts where Umbridge's rules didn't reach, where they could speak freely, practice openly, be students instead of subjects. It couldn't last. Harry knew that. They all did. But for a few weeks, it felt like they were winning. Lucifer had been at Hogwarts for 3 weeks when he first noticed the pattern. Students disappearing at odd hours, always the same group more or less. Moving with purpose toward the 7th floor, returning an hour or 2 later, looking tired but satisfied. He didn't investigate. Wasn't his concern. He'd promised non-interference, and he meant it. But he noticed. He was standing near the library one evening when a cluster of students passed Potter among them, along with his constant companions and a few others. They were speaking in low voices, laughing about something. Potter looked different, less hunched, less defeated. The weight that had been pressing him down seemed lighter. Good for him, Lucifer thought distantly. The students disappeared around a corner. Lucifer returned to his reading a fascinating treatise on magical contract law that explained absolutely nothing while appearing to explain everything. He was 3 pages in when the connection formed. Students learning defense, in secret, against institutional prohibition, organized resistance to authoritarian overreach. The exact thing Umbridge feared most. The exact thing his contract prohibited him from encouraging. Lucifer closed the book slowly. This was going to become complicated. He'd promised Dumbledore not to interfere with school administration. He'd promised Umbridge in writing not to encourage student disobedience or rebellion. He'd said nothing about ignoring it. Loopholes. Always loopholes. He stood shelving the book with careful precision and left the library. In the room of requirement, Harry was teaching shield charms to a group of increasingly competent students, completely unaware that he'd been noticed. Completely unaware that the framework holding everything in place was getting more fragile by the day. Completely unaware that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is give people hope. Umbridge sat in her office reviewing reports. Student behavior had been concerning lately. Nothing she could prove, nothing concrete. Just a sense that control was slipping. Whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Groups forming and dispersing too quickly, eyes that didn't quite meet hers. She made notations, cross-referenced names, looked for patterns. Potter was central to it. Always Potter. The boy was a magnet for trouble. She'd increase surveillance, add more decrees, tighten the net, until whatever they were planning suffocated under the weight of regulation. Her hand moved to the drawer where she kept the contract. That ridiculous document the Morningstar man had forced her to sign. She hadn't looked at it since that day, didn't want to acknowledge its existence. But it was there, binding, limiting. She hated limits. Her quill scratched across parchment writing notes in pink ink. Plans within plans, authority carefully deployed. She would find what they were hiding, and when she did, she would crush it. Legally, properly. With every rule and regulation on her side, that was the beauty of systems. They always won eventually. You just had to be patient. Harry lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of his dormitory. His hand didn't hurt. Not tonight. Umbridge had canceled his detention, some ministry business that required her attention. A reprieve. Temporary but welcome. The DA was working. Really working. He'd seen it in the students' faces, the confidence growing, the fear receding. They were learning, improving, becoming dangerous, becoming ready. for what he wasn't entirely sure. But something was coming. He could feel it in the way the castle breathed. In the weight of silence between storms, his scar tingled faintly. Not pain, just awareness, a reminder. Voldemort was out there, building power, gathering followers. And the Ministry was pretending it wasn't happening, writing decrees while the real danger grew stronger. But they were preparing anyway, in secret, in defiance. Harry closed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion of teaching settle into his bones. Tomorrow they'd practice again, and the day after, and the day after that. Until they were ready, until the storm finally broke, until there was nothing left to do but fight. He fell asleep with that thought. While downstairs, the castle continued its eternal watch, and in hidden rooms and quiet corners, the seeds of rebellion grew stronger in the dark. The black quill had become routine. 3 weeks of detention. 3 weeks of the same punishment delivered with the same pleasant smile. Harry's hand had developed a permanent tenderness, the scars layering over each other like sediment. I must not tell lies. The words were carved so many times now that they'd started to look like they belonged. Like they'd always been there. Like they were true. Harry sat at the small desk in Umbridge's office, the quill already scratching across parchment. His face was blank. He'd perfected that. Give her nothing. No reaction. No satisfaction. The pain was just background noise now. Umbridge sipped her tea, watching him with those cold eyes hidden behind the pleasant mask. She hadn't spoken in 15 minutes. Didn't need to. The quill did all the talking. Harry wrote. Line after line, his hand cramped. Blood welled. The quill drank it like a vampire, converting it to ink that spelled out his punishment in his own handwriting. The door to the office was slightly ajar. Harry didn't notice. Umbridge didn't either. Both were focused on their respective roles, torturer and victim, locked in a dance that had become depressingly familiar. But someone noticed. Lucifer had been walking past on his way to the library when he'd heard it. Not screaming, not crying, just the quiet scratch of a quill and the carefully controlled breathing of someone enduring pain. He paused, listened. The sound continued, steady, methodical. He moved to the doorway, staying just outside the threshold. Through the gap, he could see the scene. The woman in pink serene and motionless. The boy with the scar hunched over a desk, writing with a quill that left no inkpot beside it. Lucifer's eyes tracked to the boy's hand, saw the way he held the quill, saw the faint tremor, saw the red marks on pale skin. His expression didn't change, but something in the air around him went very still. He watched for 30 seconds. That was all it took to understand. Then he stepped into the doorway properly. Not entering, just present. Good evening, Professor. Umbridge looked up, her smile reflexive. Mr. Morningstar, how unexpected. Was there something you needed? I was passing by. The door was open. Was it? She glanced at the door, then back to him. How careless of me. We're just finishing up a detention. Nothing to concern yourself with. Lucifer's gaze moved to Harry. The boy had stopped writing, looking up with an expression caught between surprise and wariness. What's the detention for? Lucifer asked mildly. Persistent dishonesty, Umbridge said. Mr. Potter has the unfortunate habit of spreading alarming lies. We're helping him learn better habits. With a quill. With appropriate discipline. Lucifer looked at the quill in Harry's hand, at the parchment covered in identical sentences. at the boy's other hand resting on the desk, marked with words in his own blood. Did he consent to this method of correction? The question was casual, almost conversational. Umbridge's smile tightened fractionally. Consent isn't required for disciplinary measures. The ministry has authorized my methods fully. I'm sure they have. Lucifer's tone remained neutral. I'm simply asking whether the student agreed to have his blood used as ink for punishment. Whether he signed any agreement accepting this specific consequence. Harry was staring at him now. So was Umbridge. He doesn't need to sign anything, Umbridge said, her voice losing some of its sweetness. This is detention. Students don't negotiate the terms of their punishments. No. Lucifer tilted his head slightly. Interesting. Because by my understanding, using someone's blood without their explicit consent qualifies as a form of coercion, possibly even torture depending on the legal framework. The temperature in the room dropped. Umbridge stood slowly. Mr. Morningstar, I don't appreciate your tone. This is an internal school matter. It doesn't concern you. You're right. It doesn't. Lucifer's gaze moved back to Harry. I'm simply clarifying terminology for my own understanding. He looked at the boy directly, met his eyes. Did you agree to this? Harry's mouth opened, closed. He looked between Lucifer and Umbridge, clearly uncertain what was happening. Answer honestly, Lucifer said quietly. Did you consent to having your blood used as punishment? Harry's voice was rough. She said it was detention, that I had to. That's not what I asked. Silence. No, Harry said finally. I didn't agree. She just gave me the quill and told me to write. Lucifer nodded once. Then he looked at Umbridge. That's coercion. That's discipline. Coercion, Lucifer repeated. Forcing someone to endure physical harm without their consent in order to modify their behavior. The definition is quite clear. Umbridge's hand moved toward her wand. You're overstepping, Mr. Morningstar. I suggest you leave, now. In a moment, he glanced at the quill still in Harry's hand. That's a fascinating instrument. A blood quill, I assume. Enchanted to draw from the user without requiring external ink. Elegant. Also explicitly banned in most jurisdictions for its use in extracting involuntary magical signatures. It's not banned here. No, just highly regulated, requiring documentation, consent forms, medical oversight. His eyes returned to Umbridge. Do you have those documents? Her face had gone the color of curdled milk. This is a school detention. I don't need... You need consent. That was the agreement. Our agreement. His voice was very soft now, very precise. No coercion, no torture. Those were your promised terms. The contract. He was invoking the contract. Umbridge's breathing had gone shallow. This isn't torture. What would you call it? Appropriate discipline for persistent rule-breaking. Without consent, using a device designed to cause pain, applied repeatedly over weeks. Lucifer's tone remained calm, clinical. If that's not coercion, I'd be curious to hear your definition. Harry was frozen, still holding the quill, watching this exchange like a spectator at a tennis match. His brain was struggling to process what was happening. This stranger, this visiting scholar he'd barely noticed, was arguing contract law with Umbridge. Over him. It was surreal. Umbridge's hand was on her wand now, properly gripping it. Get out of my office. Of course. Lucifer didn't move, but the quill should stop working now. What? The quill, it's an instrument of coercion. You're using it in violation of our agreement, so it should stop working. Umbridge laughed, high and tight. That's not how magic works, isn't it? Lucifer looked at Harry, at the quill. Try writing again. Harry hesitated. Then, more out of reflex than intention, he put quill to parchment. The quill moved, scratched out a word, in regular ink. Black ink. From nowhere. Just appearing on the page like a normal quill would produce, except there was no ink pot, but the letters were dark and clean and utterly ordinary. Harry stared at it, turned his hand over. No new cuts, no blood, no pain, just ink. What did you do? Umbridge's voice was shrill now. Nothing. Lucifer's expression was utterly calm. I simply observed that the quill was being used to coerce someone without consent. Coercion requires the cooperation of the coerced. If cooperation is withdrawn, he shrugged slightly, the instrument loses its leverage. That's impossible. And yet, Harry was still staring at his hand, at the quill. He wrote another line experimentally. Normal ink, no pain. The quill had been, what defanged, neutered it still worked. It just didn't hurt anymore. Umbridge looked like she was about to explode. Her face had gone from pale to purple. Her hand was shaking on her wand. You can't just... I haven't done anything, Lucifer said mildly. I've simply pointed out a violation of our agreement. The quill's function adjusted accordingly. That's how binding contracts work, Professor. Both parties are held to their terms. He turned toward the door, paused. I'd recommend finding a different detention method, one that doesn't require consent you haven't obtained. Good evening. He left. Just walked out, calm and unhurried. Behind him, Umbridge stood trembling with rage, staring at Harry with an expression that promised retribution. But she couldn't do anything. Not now. Not with the quill defanged and her authority questioned, and the contract hanging over her like a guillotine. Get out, she hissed. Harry scrambled to his feet, leaving the quill on the desk. He bolted for the door, not looking back, his mind reeling. What had just happened? He'd been sitting there, enduring detention like he had for weeks. And then that man Morningstar had appeared and somehow, without casting a spell, without even raising his voice, had made the torture stop. Just by talking. Just by pointing out that it violated some agreement Harry didn't even know existed. Harry's hand still ached from the old scars, but no new ones. The quill had written in ink, normal ink. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. He walked back toward Gryffindor Tower in a daze, his thoughts spinning. When he reached the common room, Ron and Hermione were waiting up, their faces anxious. How was it? Hermione asked immediately. Harry looked at his hand, at the absence of fresh wounds. Different. Different how? He tried to explain. Stumbled through it. The stranger appearing. The questions about consent. The quill just stopping, working normally. Like its curse had been lifted. Hermione's eyes went wide. He broke the enchantment. I don't think he broke it. He just made it stop working the way it was supposed to. Like he convinced it to behave differently. That's impossible, Ron said flatly. I know. Quills don't just change function because someone talks to them. I know. Hermione was thinking, her analytical mind churning through possibilities. He mentioned an agreement, Between him and Umbridge, what agreement? No idea. But she looked scared when he brought it up. Umbridge scared. Angry scared. Like he had something on her, and she couldn't do anything about it. They sat in silence, processing this. Who is this bloke? Ron asked finally. Harry shook his head. I don't know, but I think we should find out. Lucifer walked through the empty corridors, hands in his pockets, expression neutral. That had been a mistake. Not morally. The quill was an abomination. The woman was using torture as pedagogy. The intervention was justified. But tactically, he just revealed himself. Shown that he could affect magical objects through will alone. Demonstrated that his contract with Umbridge had actual teeth. Made himself interesting. The last thing he wanted was to be interesting. He'd promised non-interference, and technically he'd kept that promise. He hadn't interfered with school administration, hadn't encouraged rebellion, hadn't disrupted the lawful execution of Umbridge's duties. He'd simply pointed out that her methods violated the contract she'd signed, and the quill had responded to that reality. Not magic, just consequence. But people would call it magic anyway. They always did. He reached his quarters, a small room off the library that smelled of old books and dust, and sat by the window looking out over the darkened grounds. The boy would survive. The quill had lost its bite. Umbridge would find other methods probably, but they'd be more conventional, more visible, easier to challenge. He'd given the child a reprieve, nothing more. It didn't violate his terms, didn't break his promise. But it felt like the beginning of something he couldn't quite control. Like stepping onto a path that only went one direction. Lucifer closed his eyes, feeling the castle breathe around him. Feeling the weight of rules and resistance pressing against each other. Feeling the framework strain. He'd been here less than a month. Already things were shifting. This was going to get complicated. In her office, Dolores Umbridge sat alone, staring at the black quill. It lay on her desk, innocent and still. She picked it up, examined it. The enchantment was intact. She could feel it. The magic that made it draw blood, that made it carve lessons into flesh, that made punishment physical and permanent. It was all still there. But when she tried to write with it, when she pressed the tip to parchment and thought about the blood price, the quill just produced ink. Normal ink, as if the curse had forgotten how to work. She set it down carefully. Her hands were shaking. That man, that visitor. He'd done something that shouldn't be possible. You couldn't just talk an enchanted object into changing its nature. You couldn't will a curse into submission. But he had. Or had he? Maybe the quill had simply malfunctioned. Maybe the enchantment had worn out. Maybe it was coincidence. Except she didn't believe in coincidence. She pulled out the contract. The one she'd signed in anger and frustration. Read through it again more carefully this time. The signatory agrees not to use authority to coerce students into compliance through methods that would constitute torture or cruel punishment. She'd thought it was meaningless, empty language. Who would define torture? Who would enforce the terms? Apparently he would. And apparently the contract was more binding than she'd understood. Umbridge's jaw tightened. She folded the contract, put it back in the drawer, and locked it with 3 different charms. This wasn't over. The man had won a battle. One small battle. But Dolores Umbridge didn't lose wars. She'd find other methods. Legal methods. Methods that didn't technically violate the contract's terms. She was very good at finding loopholes. And when she did, Mr. Morningstar would learn that paperwork cut both ways. Harry lay in bed that night, staring at his hand. The old scars were still there. Weeks of torture didn't vanish just because one detention ended differently. But there were no new marks. The quill had stopped biting because of a stranger, because of a contract, because someone had finally said no to umbrage and made it stick. Harry didn't understand it, didn't trust it. But he felt something shifting. Some small crack in the wall of institutional cruelty that had surrounded him since term started. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was space. Room to breathe. He closed his eyes and let exhaustion pull him down into sleep. Tomorrow the DA would meet again. They'd practice shields. They'd get stronger. They'd prepare for whatever was coming. Tonight his hand didn't hurt. That was enough. The notice board had become a monument to control. Educational Decree number 27 hung at the top, freshly posted, its pink border crisp and official. Below it, 26 others formed a cascading wall of restrictions, each one stamped with the ministry seal. Each one legal, binding, absolute. Hermione stood in front of the board during the morning rush, reading through the newest edition with the focused intensity she usually reserved for exam preparation. Teachers are hereby prohibited from providing students with information not directly related to approved curriculum subjects. She read it twice. Then a third time, her mind already working through implications. Ron appeared at her shoulder, yawning. Another one. What's this one banning? Knowledge? Hermione's voice was tight. Any knowledge that isn't on the official syllabus. Teachers can't answer questions about current events. Can't discuss anything the ministry hasn't approved. That's mental. That's strategic. She pointed to a clause near the bottom. Look, unauthorized discussion of political matters will be considered grounds for disciplinary review. They're not just controlling what we learn. They're controlling what we can even talk about. Harry joined them, his book bag slung over one shoulder. His hand was healing properly, healing for the first time in weeks. The scars were fading to thin silver lines. What now? Thought crime, Hermione said flatly. What? She's criminalizing thought, or at least discussion of unapproved thoughts. Hermione gestured at the board. Look at them all. Really look. Every decree is about limiting information, restricting communication, isolating us from anything that might contradict the official narrative. Harry scanned the board. She was right. When you read them together, the pattern was obvious. No student organizations, no unapproved reading material, all OWL post-inspected. Teachers prohibited from discussing non-curriculum topics. Every rule designed to create a closed system. A bubble where only ministry-approved truth could exist. This is what dictatorships do. Hermione continued, her voice low but fierce. Control information. Limit communication. Make people afraid to speak. It's textbook oppression. Bit dramatic, isn't it? Ron looked uncomfortable. I mean, it's just school rules. It's never just school rules. She turned to face him. That's how it works. It starts with reasonable-sounding restrictions, for safety, for order, for your own good. And by the time you realize what's happening, it's too late to resist, because resistance itself has been made illegal. Students were starting to gather around them now, drawn by Hermione's intensity. A few were nodding. Others looked nervous. So, what do we do? A third-year Hufflepuff asked. Hermione opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. Looked around. At the students listening. at the decree on the board that specifically prohibited discussing political matters. They were being watched, always watched. "We read carefully," she said finally. "We pay attention to what they're actually saying, not just what they claim to mean. And we remember that rules aren't the same as truth." The crowd dispersed slowly. Harry and Ron remained. "That was close," Ron muttered. "Almost sounded like you were advocating rebellion there." "I was advocating literacy," but Hermione's hands were shaking slightly. "Come on. We'll be late for charms." They left. The board remained its decrees accumulating like sediment, building up layer by layer, creating something that looked like order but felt like suffocation. No one noticed the tall blonde man standing near the entrance reading the newest decree with an expression of distant interest. Lucifer had developed a habit. Every morning he walked past the notice board, read the new decrees, observed the students' reactions. It was anthropological research in a way, watching how institutional power worked when wielded with precision. Educational Decree number 27 was particularly elegant. On the surface, it simply prevented teachers from wasting time on irrelevant topics. Perfectly reasonable. In practice, it criminalized education itself. He'd seen it before. Different worlds, different systems. Same playbook. Control the narrative. Limit the questions. Make curiosity dangerous. It was effective. Depressingly so. Lucifer stood in front of the board, hands in his pockets, reading through the accumulated decrees with the attention they deserved. 27 separate restrictions, each one legal. Each one justified by some reasonable-sounding concern. Together they formed a cage. Fascinating, isn't it? He turned. A girl with bushy brown hair and sharp eyes stood a few feet away. The one who'd been speaking earlier. "Granger, the decrees," Lucifer asked mildly. "The way they're written. The language is so careful, so precise. Like someone spent hours making sure every word could be defended." She moved closer, studying the board. "But when you read them all together, the real purpose becomes obvious. Which is total information control." She pointed at Decree 23. "This one bans student organizations. Says it's about preventing dangerous assemblies. But it also prevents study groups, support networks, any form of collective resistance." Her finger moved to 24. "This one restricts reading material, claims it's about protecting students from dark magic. But it also bans newspapers, political pamphlets, anything that might contradict ministry statements." Lucifer listened, impressed despite himself. The girl had a sharp mind. She saw the structure beneath the text. "You've given this considerable thought," he observed. "I read." She looked at him directly. "You're the visiting scholar, Morningstar." "I am." "You helped Harry with his detention." Word had spread then. Inevitable. "I observed a violation of terms. Nothing more." "You made Umbridge's torture quill stop working?" Hermione's voice was carefully neutral. "That's not nothing. The quill still works. It simply no longer draws blood without consent." "How?" "By recognizing what it was being used for." Lucifer returned his attention to the board. Coercion requires cooperation. When cooperation is withdrawn, the mechanism fails. Hermione frowned, processing this. "That's not how magic works." "Isn't it? You perform a spell. The magic cooperates with your intent. If your intent violates fundamental principles, consent, free will, basic human dignity, the cooperation becomes unstable. Magic doesn't have morality. Everything has principles. even systems that claim neutrality. He gestured at the decrees. These, for instance. They claim to be objective rules, but they're built on assumptions about authority, about whose voice matters, about what truth is. Hermione was staring at him with an expression caught between fascination and suspicion. "You talk like a philosopher." "I've had time to develop opinions. About what? Systems of control, how they're built, how they justify themselves, how they fail." She absorbed this. Then carefully, "Do you think these will fail?" Lucifer considered the question, looked at the board, at the careful accumulation of restrictions, at the framework of control being constructed one decree at a time. "Yes," he said finally, "but not because someone tears them down, because they'll collapse under their own weight. Systems like this always do. They require too much energy to maintain, too much surveillance, too much fear. Eventually, the gap between what they claim to be and what they actually are becomes too obvious to ignore. How long does that take? Depends on how willing people are to pretend not to notice." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're dangerous." Lucifer raised an eyebrow. "Am I? You make people think, question things. That's the most dangerous thing you can do in a place like this." "I thought you valued thinking." "I do, but Umbridge doesn't. And she has the power to punish it." Hermione glanced around, lowering her voice. "Be careful. She's already watching you. After what you did with the quill, she'll be looking for any excuse to remove you." "I appreciate the warning. I'm serious. She destroys people who get in her way, and you just put yourself directly in her path." Lucifer smiled slightly. It didn't reach his eyes. "I've been in paths before." Hermione studied him for a long moment, then nodded and walked away, leaving him alone with the decrees. He returned his attention to the board, to Decree 27. Read it again more slowly this time. The words were so careful, so deliberate, hiding their true purpose behind layers of reasonable-sounding justification. What if they couldn't hide anymore? The thought came unbidden. Dangerous. He'd promised non-interference, promised not to disrupt the school's administration, but he'd said nothing about making the administration explain itself honestly. Lucifer reached out, touching the parchment of Decree 27. Not magic. Just contact. Just attention focused with absolute clarity on what the words actually meant beneath what they claimed to mean. "Tell the truth," he murmured. Too quiet for anyone to hear. Nothing happened. No flash of light. No dramatic transformation. He withdrew his hand and walked away. Behind him, the decree hung exactly as before. Same words, same pink border, same ministry seal. Exactly the same. It was Neville who noticed first. He was walking past the board later that morning, not really paying attention, when something caught his eye. A line of text on Decree 27 that seemed different. Darker, maybe, or just more noticeable. He stopped. Read it. "Teachers are hereby prohibited from providing students with information not directly related to approved curriculum subjects." Below it, in slightly smaller text that he could swear hadn't been there before. "Purpose prevents students from learning information that contradicts ministry messaging regarding the return of you-know-who." Neville blinked, read it again. The additional text was still there, faint but visible. Like a footnote, like a confession. "Blimey," he whispered. He looked around. The corridor was empty. He read the decree more carefully, scanning for other changes. There. Another line. Under the clause about unauthorized political discussion, intent criminalized dissent by categorizing criticism of ministry policy as disruption. And another. At the bottom. Almost invisible. Enforcement mechanism. Create atmosphere of surveillance and fear to ensure self-censorship among student body. Neville felt his stomach tighten. These weren't just rules. They were weapons. And now the weapons were labeled. He hurried away, looking for someone to tell. Found Hermione in the library, buried in a book about magical contracts. Hermione, the board. Something's wrong with it. She looked up, alert immediately. Wrong how? The new decree. It's got extra writing. Like notes. Explaining what it's really for. Hermione was on her feet instantly. They practically ran to the entrance hall. The board was surrounded by students now, all of them reading, pointing, whispering. Hermione pushed through to the front, read Decree 27. Her eyes widened. Oh my God, my. You see it too. Everyone sees it. She turned to the crowd. Can you all see the additional text? Murmurs of confirmation. Yes, they could see it. The confession hiding beneath the official language. The truth leaking through. Is this a prank? Someone asked. I don't think so, Hermione said slowly. I think the decree is telling us what it actually means, what it's really for. Decrees don't do that. This one is. She scanned the other decrees quickly. Most looked normal. But 26. The one about visitor registration now had a faint additional line. Objective establish ministry authority over all persons within Hogwarts, including those outside normal jurisdiction. And 23 about student organizations. Goal: prevent organized resistance by making collective action illegal. One by one, the decrees were revealing themselves. Not all of them. Not dramatically. Just small additions, quiet admissions. The truth bleeding through the bureaucratic language like ink through thin paper. By lunch, half the school knew. By dinner, everyone was talking about it. Umbridge heard about it during her afternoon inspections. She went to the board immediately, students scattering before her like leaves in wind. Stood in front of Decree 27, her face perfectly still. The additional text was there, clear as day, undeniable. She pulled out her wand, muttered a detection charm, then another, then 3 different removal spells. The text remained. It wasn't a prank, wasn't graffiti. It was the decree itself speaking more honestly than it had been written. Umbridge's hands were shaking. She looked at the other decrees, saw the additions, saw her careful work being undone by its own honesty. Who did this? Her voice was very quiet, very dangerous. The students who'd gathered to watch said nothing. Who tampered with these documents? Silence. Umbridge spun, scanning faces, looking for guilt, for fear, for any sign of who might be responsible. She found nothing, just students watching her with expressions ranging from confused to carefully blank. This is vandalism, she said, her voice climbing toward shrill. Defacement of official ministry property. Whoever is responsible will be expelled immediately. Is it vandalism if it's true? The voice came from the back of the crowd. Hermione Granger, her chin raised, her eyes defiant. Umbridge's face went through several shades of purple. Miss Granger, detention, 1 week. For asking a question, for insubordination. I thought questions were encouraged in educational settings. Not questions like that. What kind of questions are allowed exactly? Hermione's voice was steady, controlled. Because Decree 27 says teachers can't discuss anything off curriculum, which means we can't ask about current events, can't discuss the news, can't even wonder out loud about whether the ministry is telling the truth. Silence. The word cracked through the hall like a whip. Hermione fell silent, but she didn't look away, didn't back down. Umbridge was breathing hard, her chest rising and falling beneath layers of pink cardigan. You will report to my office tonight at 7, and you will keep your dangerous opinions to yourself. Do I make myself clear? Crystal clear, Professor? Hermione's tone was poison-sweet. Obedience is clarity. That's what Decree 19 says, isn't it? Under the new annotation about criminalizing critical thought. Umbridge looked like she might spontaneously combust. Instead, she turned and marched away, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The students watched her go, then slowly turned back to the board. The annotations were still there, still visible, still true. Someone started to laugh, quietly at first, then louder. Others joined in, not cruel laughter, not mocking, just the release of tension, the joy of seeing power made ridiculous by its own words. Hermione didn't laugh. She stood very still, reading the decrees one more time, committing them to memory. Someone had done this. Someone had made the rules confess. She had a pretty good idea who. Lucifer sat in his quarters that evening reading by candlelight. He'd walked past the board once after the annotations appeared, seen the crowd, heard the whispers, watched Umbridge's meltdown from a safe distance. It had been more dramatic than intended. He'd simply asked the decree to tell the truth. Hadn't expected it to be quite so literal about it. But the effect was undeniable. Students were talking, questioning, seeing through the careful language to the mechanism beneath. Had he interfered? Technically, no. He hadn't changed the decrees, hadn't removed them, hadn't even contradicted them. He'd simply encouraged honesty, made it impossible for the system to lie about what it was doing. Was that interference or just clarification? He suspected Dumbledore would have opinions. Umbridge certainly would. But the deed was done. The truth was visible, and truth once seen couldn't be easily unseen. There was a knock at his door. Lucifer set down his book. Enter. Hermione Granger stepped inside, looking nervous but determined. I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Did you do it? The annotations on the decrees, Lucifer considered lying. Decided against it. Yes. How? I asked them to be honest about their purpose. Magic doesn't work like that. Everything works like that, if you ask correctly. He gestured to a chair. Sit. You look ready to collapse. She sat, her hands clenched in her lap. Umbridge is going to find out it was you. Probably. She'll have you removed, or arrested, or worse. Possibly. And you did it anyway. Lucifer met her eyes. The decrees were lying. I don't like lies, especially lies that pretend to be law. But your contract. My contract prohibits interference with school administration. It says nothing about making that administration tell the truth about what it's doing. He smiled faintly. Loopholes, Miss Granger. Always read for loopholes. Hermione stared at him. Then unexpectedly she laughed, short and sharp. You're completely mad. I've been called worse. Umbridge will destroy you for this. She can try. His expression didn't change. But I've been destroyed before. It rarely takes. Hermione shook her head, something between admiration and terror in her eyes. Why risk it? You don't owe us anything. No, Lucifer agreed. I don't. Then why? He was quiet for a long moment, looking at this girl who asked questions and refused to stop thinking and wouldn't bow just because someone told her to. Because systems that rely on lies deserve to be embarrassed, he said finally. And because someone should. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. Hermione stood. Thank you for what you did, even if it was completely insane. You're welcome. And Miss Granger, she paused at the door. Your detention tonight, with Umbridge. Be careful. She's going to be looking for revenge. Hermione's jaw tightened. I know. She left. Lucifer returned to his book, but he wasn't really reading anymore. He'd crossed a line tonight. A small line, but significant. The decrees would probably revert eventually. Umbridge would find a way to remove the annotations, restore the careful lies. But for now, for one perfect moment, the truth had been visible. And the students had seen it. Sometimes that was enough. Outside, the castle settled into its evening rhythms. The annotations on the decrees glowed faintly in the torchlight, confessing sins their authors never meant to admit. Truth, it turned out, was harder to suppress than Umbridge had anticipated, and considerably more dangerous. Marietta Edgecombe had never wanted to be part of Dumbledore's army. She'd joined because Cho asked, because refusing would have meant questions isolation, the kind of social pressure that made fifth year unbearable. Not because she believed in it, not because she wanted to learn defense from Harry Potter of all people. And now, she was sitting in Professor Umbridge's office, hands trembling, trying very hard not to cry. I'm going to ask you one more time, Miss Edgecombe. Umbridge's voice was sugar over steel. Are you aware of any unauthorized student organizations operating within Hogwarts? Marietta said nothing. Couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up. Umbridge sighed, set down her teacup with deliberate care. I understand loyalty to one's friends. Truly I do. But you must understand the position you're in. Your mother works for the ministry, in my department specifically. Her position depends on her reliability, on her family's reliability. The implication hung heavy in the perfumed air. If I were to mention to your mother that her daughter was involved in illegal activities, well, the ministry takes such matters very seriously, especially during these troubled times. I'm sure you understand. Marietta's hands clenched in her lap. I haven't done anything illegal. Haven't you? Umbridge leaned forward slightly. Participation in banned organizations is a violation of Educational Decree 23. Attendance at unauthorized meetings violates Decree 26. Lying to ministry officials, which is what you're doing right now, violates Decree 19. She smiled. Warm, maternal, poisonous. These are serious infractions, Miss Edgecombe. Expulsion-worthy. But they don't have to be. What do you want? Information. Names, meeting locations, a simple statement confirming what I already know. Umbridge slid a piece of parchment across the desk. Sign this, and we can forget this conversation ever happened. Your mother keeps her position. You avoid expulsion. Everyone benefits. Marietta stared at the parchment, at the neat lines waiting for her signature, at the trap closing around her. And if I don't, Umbridge's smile never wavered. Then I'll have no choice but to pursue formal disciplinary proceedings against you. And regrettably, I'll need to inform your mother that her daughter is under investigation for activities that could be considered treasonous. Given the current climate, treasonous. The word landed like a physical blow. That's not, we're just practicing defense. Without authorization, in secret. Led by a student who publicly claims you-know-who has returned spreading panic and undermining ministry authority. Umbridge's tone remained pleasant, conversational. How do you think that looks, Miss Edgecombe? To those making decisions about your future, your mother's future. Marietta felt tears burning behind her eyes. This wasn't fair. She hadn't wanted any of this, hadn't asked to be put in this position. I need an answer, dear. Now. The quill was already in Marietta's hand. She didn't remember picking it up. Her signature appeared on the parchment, shaky, small, damning. Harry knew something was wrong the moment he entered the room of requirement. The space felt different, colder, like the castle itself was holding its breath. 20 students had gathered for tonight's session, smaller than usual. Several regulars were missing. Hermione noticed too, her eyes scanning the room with growing concern. "Where's Marietta?" Cho asked quietly. No one answered. "Right," Harry said, trying to sound confident. "Let's start with shield charms. Pair up." The door burst open. Umbridge stood framed in the doorway, flanked by Filch and 3 other members of staff Harry didn't recognize. Her smile was triumphant, vicious. Well, well, what do we have here? The room froze. Every student going statue still, wands half raised, caught in the act. Umbridge stepped inside, her eyes sweeping across faces, taking inventory. An unauthorized gathering. How disappointing. And after so many warnings. "We're just studying," Harry started. "Silence, Mr. Potter." Her voice cracked like a whip. "You are in violation of Educational Decrees 23, 26, and 30. Organizing illegal assemblies, spreading seditious material, undermining ministry authority." She pulled out a roll of parchment. "I have a signed statement from Miss Edgecombe detailing the nature, frequency, and membership of this little rebellion." Cho made a small sound. Pain and betrayal mixed. "Everyone will proceed to the Great Hall immediately," Umbridge continued, "where you will await disciplinary hearings. Those found guilty will face expulsion." "You can't expel all of us." Hermione's voice was steady despite the fear. "Can't I?" Umbridge's smile widened. "The ministry has granted me full authority over student discipline. I can do whatever is necessary to maintain order." She gestured to the staff members. "Escort them. And someone find Miss Edgecombe. She'll need protection from her former friends." The students moved slowly, shepherded toward the door. Harry caught Hermione's eye, saw the same question reflected there. How had Umbridge found them? How had she known? The answer walked in as they were filing out. Marietta Edgecombe, her face blotchy with tears, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Understanding hit like cold water. She'd told. She'd given them up. Lucifer heard about it from McGonagall. She found him in the library, her expression grim. "The army's been discovered. Umbridge has them in the Great Hall. She's threatening mass expulsions." Lucifer set down his book. "How did she find out?" "Coerced one of the students into confessing. Threatened the girl's mother's job. Standard intimidation tactics." "Coercion." The word hung in the air between them. McGonagall looked at him sharply. Don't what?" "Whatever you're thinking." Umbridge is within her legal rights. The students were breaking rules. She threatened a child with her mother's unemployment to extract information. Lucifer's voice was very quiet. That's textbook coercion. That's politics. That's a violation of our agreement. McGonagall fell silent. She'd read the contract, knew its terms. You can't intervene every time she oversteps. I'm not intervening. I'm enforcing the terms she agreed to. He stood. Where is she? Lucifer. Where? McGonagall sighed. Great Hall, but if you do this, if you invoke the contract publicly, she'll find a way to retaliate. Against you. Against the students. Against anyone she can reach. Let her try. He walked past her, moving with purpose. McGonagall watched him go, feeling the weight of inevitability settle over her shoulders. This was going to get very complicated. The Great Hall had been arranged like a courtroom. Umbridge sat at the head table, surrounded by documentation. The students, all 28 members of the DA, stood in a cluster near the entrance, guarded by staff. Their faces ranged from defiant to terrified. Harry stood at the front, jaw clenched, refusing to look away, as Umbridge read through charges. Violation of Educational Decree 23, Unauthorized Student Organization. Violation of Decree 26, Unapproved Assembly. Violation of Decree 30, Conspiracy to Undermine Ministry Authority. Those charges are based on coerced testimony. Every head turned. Lucifer stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, expression calm. Umbridge's eyes narrowed. Mr. Morningstar, this is a disciplinary hearing. You have no authority here. I have a contract. He walked forward slowly. One you signed. One you're currently violating. I am doing no such thing. You threatened Miss Edgecombe with her mother's dismissal to force her to betray her classmates. That's coercion. Specifically prohibited under the terms of our agreement. Umbridge stood, her face flushing. That was legitimate questioning. You gave her a choice between betrayal and destroying her mother's career. That's not questioning. That's extortion. Lucifer's voice remained level. Surgical. You used your authority to inflict psychological harm on a minor in order to extract information. The definition is quite clear. I was investigating illegal activity. You were torturing a confession out of a frightened child. The word hung in the air. Torture. Umbridge's hand went to her wand. How dare you? Read the contract, Professor. Lucifer pulled the document from his pocket, set it on the table between them. Section 2, Clause B. The signatory agrees not to use authority to coerce students into compliance through methods that would constitute torture or cruel punishment. You agreed. In writing. Witnessed. I tortured no one. You threatened permanent harm to a student's family to force cooperation. If that's not cruel punishment, I invite you to provide an alternative definition. The students were watching this exchange like a tennis match. Harry had never seen anyone stand up to Umbridge like this. Not with violence, not with defiance, just with words. Logic. The inexorable weight of terms she'd agreed to. Umbridge's breathing had gone shallow. This is absurd. The contract doesn't apply to legitimate disciplinary. The contract applies to everything you do in your capacity as High Inquisitor. That was the agreement. You promised not to use coercion. You broke that promise. Lucifer's eyes were very cold now, very focused, which means the contract is void. Silence. Heavy. Waiting. Void. Umbridge's voice came out strangled. You violated the terms. The agreement is null, which means whatever protection it offered you. He let the sentence hang. You're bluffing. Am I? Lucifer took a step closer. Not threatening, just present. You wanted this contract because it gave you leverage, documentation, proof that even someone like me acknowledged your authority. But contracts are bilateral, Professor. When one party breaks faith, the other is released from obligation. You can't. I already have. He gestured to the students. Release them, now, or discover what happens when I'm no longer bound to stay out of your way. McGonagall had entered during the exchange. She stood near the door, watching with an expression caught between horror and reluctant admiration. Umbridge looked around wildly, at the students, at the staff, at the contract lying on the table like an accusation. This isn't over, she hissed. No, Lucifer agreed. It isn't. But this particular abuse of power is. Let them go. For a long moment, no one moved. The air felt electric, dangerous. Then Umbridge made a sharp gesture. Get out, all of you. The students didn't wait for a second invitation. They fled, moving in a tight group, not quite believing they were being released. Harry paused at the door, looked back at Lucifer. Their eyes met. Harry wanted to say something, thank you, or why, or who are you really, but the words wouldn't come. Lucifer nodded once. Dismissal and acknowledgement combined. Harry left with the others. When the hall was empty, except for Umbridge, Lucifer, and McGonagall, the silence was deafening. You've made an enemy, McGonagall said quietly. I had one already. Lucifer picked up the contract. This just made it official. Umbridge was trembling, with rage or fear or both. The Ministry will hear about this. You interfered with a legitimate disciplinary proceeding. I enforced a contract you signed voluntarily. His voice was flat, final. Tell the Ministry whatever you like. But we both know what you did, and we both know what it means. He turned and left the contract still in his hand. Umbridge stood alone at the head table, surrounded by her carefully prepared documentation, her elaborate charges, her framework of control. All of it useless now, all of it undermined by words on paper. She'd been too arrogant to take seriously. McGonagall watched her for a moment, then followed Lucifer out, closing the door softly behind her. In the corridor, students were scattered in small groups, whispering, trying to process what had just happened. That was incredibly reckless, McGonagall said. Lucifer didn't break stride. It was necessary. You voided your own protection. She can move against you now without restriction. Let her. Lucifer, he stopped, looked at her directly. She was torturing children to maintain power. Someone had to say no. Since you couldn't, I did. The word stung. McGonagall's jaw tightened. I have to work within the system. The system is broken. Working within it just legitimizes the breaking. And your way, public confrontation. Voiding agreements, that's better. It's honest. He resumed walking. Sometimes that's enough. McGonagall watched him disappear around a corner, then sighed and headed toward Dumbledore's office. The headmaster would need to know about this. Everything was about to get considerably worse. Harry sat in the common room, surrounded by DA members, trying to explain what had just happened. He just walked in, Hermione was saying, her voice still shaky with adrenaline. Told Umbridge she'd violated their contract. Made her let us go. What contract? Ron asked. I don't know. But it was enough to scare her. You saw her face. Harry had. He'd also seen Lucifer's face. Calm, controlled, absolutely merciless beneath the pleasant surface. Who is he really? Cho asked quietly. No one had an answer. Harry looked at his hand, at the fading scars from the blood quill, at the evidence that someone had already intervened once on his behalf. I don't know, he said finally. But I think we should be grateful he's on our side. Is he? Hermione's question was soft. On our side, I mean. Or is he just against Umbridge? Does it matter? It might. Eventually. Harry thought about that. About the way Lucifer had looked at Umbridge. Not with hatred, not with righteousness. Just with the cold certainty of someone pointing out an error in mathematics. This wasn't personal for him. It was principle, which made him more dangerous than any ally, and more valuable than any enemy. We should be careful, Hermione said. Around him, he's not what he seems. What is he then? She shook her head. I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not just a visiting scholar. The fire crackled. Students drifted off to bed. The common room emptied slowly. Harry stayed staring into the flames, thinking about contracts and coercion and the way power could be fought with something as simple as words. Somewhere in the castle, Umbridge was planning revenge. Somewhere else, Lucifer was reading unbothered, waiting for the next move. And somewhere between them, the framework that held Hogwarts together was cracking. Just a little more each day. Minerva McGonagall had not slept. She sat at her desk in the pre-dawn darkness, surrounded by parchment. Documentation. Evidence. 3 decades of teaching had taught her many things, but the most important lesson was this: institutions responded to paperwork. Not righteousness, not moral arguments. Paperwork. Before her lay a stack of carefully prepared documents. Witness statements from students about Marietta Edgecombe's coercion. Medical reports on Harry Potter's hand, detailing injuries consistent with blood quill use. A copy of the Morningstar contract annotated with dates and specific violations. Testimony from staff who'd observed Umbridge's methods. And sitting atop the pile, her formal complaint to the Board of Governors. McGonagall dipped her quill in ink and began the cover letter. Her handwriting was precise, emotionless. She'd learned long ago that bureaucracy responded better to cold facts than hot fury. To the Hogwarts Board of Governors, I write to formally document concerns regarding the conduct of High Inquisitor Dolores Umbridge. The words flowed. Clinical, devastating. Each paragraph a nail in a coffin built from official procedures and proper channels. When she finished, the sun was rising. She sealed everything in a portfolio, addressed it with care, and carried it to the owlery. Her own owl, an ancient eagle owl named Hermes, regarded her with knowing eyes. To the board, she told him, and don't let anyone intercept it. Hermes took the portfolio in his talons and launched into the morning sky. McGonagall watched him disappear into gray clouds. Then she straightened her shoulders and went to find Dumbledore. They had a war to prepare for. Umbridge discovered the filing within hours. Her network of informants was extensive. Someone always talked. Someone always knew. She sat in her office reading through a copy of McGonagall's complaint that had been acquired. Her hands were very steady. Her face was very calm. Inside, she was calculating. The complaint was comprehensive, well documented, difficult to dismiss, but not impossible. Umbridge pulled out fresh parchment and began her own letters. To Fudge, to her allies on the board, to everyone who owed her favors or feared her reach. She wrote with the efficiency of someone who'd spent a career weaponizing bureaucracy. Each letter carefully calibrated, each argument precisely targeted. By noon, 6 owls had left her office carrying counter-narratives and strategic denials. The game had moved to a new battlefield, one she knew intimately. Harry was in transfiguration when the atmosphere changed. He couldn't explain it. Just a shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there that morning. McGonagall was teaching with her usual precision, but there was something different in her posture, a coiled energy, like she was waiting for something. Halfway through class, an official-looking owl swooped through the window. McGonagall caught the letter, smoothly read it without expression, and tucked it into her robes. "Continue practicing," she said crisply. "I'll return momentarily." She left. The students exchanged glances. "That wasn't a normal letter," Hermione whispered. "How do you know?" Ron asked. "Board of Governors seal. I saw it." Harry felt his stomach tighten. "What's the Board of Governors?" "The people who actually run Hogwarts. Above Dumbledore, above everyone." Hermione's eyes were bright with understanding. "Someone filed a formal complaint." "About what?" "About Umbridge. Has to be." Hope flickered. Dangerous and fragile. The Board of Governors met in emergency session 3 days later. Dumbledore attended. So did McGonagall. Umbridge arrived, flanked by ministry representatives, her smile fixed in place. The meeting room was austere. Stone walls, long table, 12 governors seated like judges. The chair, a severe woman named Griselda Marchbanks, read through McGonagall's complaint with meticulous attention. Then turned to Umbridge. "Professor Umbridge, you stand accused of using torture as a disciplinary tool, of coercing students through threats against their families, of violating the terms of a signed agreement prohibiting such methods. How do you respond?" Umbridge's smile never wavered. "These accusations are entirely false, based on misunderstandings and the complaints of students facing legitimate discipline." "We have medical evidence," McGonagall interrupted coolly. "Documented injuries, witness testimony, from biased sources. Students who were caught breaking rules and seeking to avoid consequences." Umbridge gestured to her ministry representatives. "My methods have been reviewed and approved by the Department of Magical Education. I have authorization for all disciplinary measures employed." "Authorization from the ministry doesn't supersede the school's duty of care," Marchbanks said sharply. "With respect, the ministry's authority in this matter is absolute. Educational Decree 42 grants the High Inquisitor full discretion over student discipline." "Decree 42 was issued after these incidents occurred," McGonagall countered. "Retroactive authorization doesn't legitimize prior misconduct." The argument spiraled. Legal technicalities, competing jurisdictions, the clash of institutional authorities. Dumbledore sat quietly, saying nothing, watching. After 2 hours, Marchbanks called for recess. "We'll reconvene tomorrow. Both parties will submit additional documentation by evening." More paperwork, more delays. It was how the system worked. Slowly, carefully, maddeningly. Lucifer heard about the hearing from a portrait. He was reading in an alcove when a sharp-faced wizard in a painting leaned out and said, "Board's in session. About that pink nightmare. Thought you'd want to know." "Thank you," Lucifer said absently. The portrait sniffed. "McGonagall's putting up a fight," Smart woman. Uses procedure like a weapon. Does she? Better than most. But the ministry has weight on their side. Numbers, political pressure. Umbridge won't go down easy. Lucifer closed his book. No one ever does. He found McGonagall in her office that evening, buried in documents. She looked up when he entered, her expression wary. I'm busy. I know. The hearing. He sat without invitation. How did it go? Inconclusive. They're reconvening tomorrow. She rubbed her eyes. Umbridge has the ministry backing her. We have evidence, but evidence only matters if the people judging are willing to see it. And they're not. Some are, some aren't. Some are waiting to see which way the wind blows. McGonagall's voice was bitter. Politics. Lucifer was quiet for a moment. You did the right thing, filing the complaint. Did I, or did I just make things worse? She gestured at the paperwork. Umbridge is digging in. The ministry's closing ranks. And the students are still caught in the middle. They'd be caught regardless. At least now there's documentation, a record. Truth in writing. Truth in writing doesn't mean much if no one acts on it. It means something, Lucifer said quietly, even if it doesn't feel like it now. McGonagall looked at him, really looked. You avoided your contract, released yourself from the promise not to interfere. Why haven't you? Because this is your fight, your system. You understand it better than I do. But if we lose, you won't. Not permanently. He stood. Systems like this collapse eventually. The question is how much damage they do first. That's not comforting. No. But it's true. He left her to her paperwork, to her careful documentation of institutional failure. In the corridor outside, students were heading to dinner. Their voices echoed. Young, uncertain, waiting for adults to fix things. Lucifer continued walking, hands in his pockets, thinking about processes and procedures and the slow, grinding wheels of justice. Sometimes the right thing took time. Sometimes it took too long. The board reconvened the next day with a decision. McGonagall and Dumbledore sat on one side of the table. Umbridge and her ministry representatives on the other. Marchbanks stood. After reviewing all documentation and testimony, this board finds insufficient evidence to support the removal of High Inquisitor Umbridge from her position. McGonagall's face went white. Insufficient, we provided medical records, which could have multiple causes. The contract mentioned was signed privately without board oversight. The testimony comes primarily from students with disciplinary records. Marchbank's tone was clipped, professional. The board cannot act on ambiguous evidence during a period of ministry oversight. This is political cowardice. This is prudent governance. Marchbanks looked genuinely regretful. Professor McGonagall, your concerns are noted. They will remain on record. But absent more definitive proof, we cannot override ministry authority. Umbridge's smile was radiant, victorious. However, Marchbanks continued, and the smile faltered. We are recommending increased scrutiny of all disciplinary procedures, monthly reviews, mandatory documentation of any punishments exceeding standard detention, and a formal inquiry into the use of historical artifacts for punishment purposes. It wasn't removal, but it was limitation, surveillance, a leash. Umbridge's jaw tightened. Of course, the board's guidance is always welcome. The meeting adjourned. McGonagall left stiffly, her disappointment radiating like heat. Dumbledore caught up with her in the corridor. You did well, Minerva. We lost. We created a record. That's not nothing. It feels like nothing. I know. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. But you fought correctly. Within the system. With integrity. That matters. McGonagall didn't respond. Just walked away, shoulders rigid. Behind them, Umbridge emerged from the meeting room, already planning how to work around the new restrictions. There were always loopholes, always ways to maintain control while appearing to comply. She'd find them. She always did. News of the board's decision spread through Hogwarts like smoke. The DA gathered in the room of requirement that night. Smaller now, more cautious. Marietta hadn't returned, neither had a few others. Harry stood in front of them, trying to find words. The board didn't remove her, he said finally. But they're watching her now. That's something. It's not enough, someone muttered. No, it's not. Harry looked around at the faces, tired, frustrated, still here despite everything. But we keep going. We keep practicing. Because when this is over, when the ministry finally admits the truth, we need to be ready. When will that be? Neville asked quietly. Harry thought about his scar, about the dreams that woke him sweating, about Voldemort growing stronger while Fudge buried his head in sand. Soon, he said. It has to be soon. They practiced anyway. Stunning spells, shield charms, the muscle memory of defense building slowly, carefully in the hidden places where Umbridge's rules couldn't quite reach. After when the others had left, Hermione pulled Harry aside. McGonagall tried, she said, really tried. Used the system exactly right. And it wasn't enough. No. But it mattered that she tried. Hermione's expression was fierce. That's what resistance looks like sometimes. Not dramatic victories. Just people doing the right thing even when it doesn't work. Harry thought about that. About McGonagall filing paperwork at dawn. About Lucifer voiding his contract to enforce terms Umbridge had broken. About all of them practicing defense in secret, preparing for a war the ministry refused to acknowledge. Yeah, he said. I guess it is. In the Department of Mysteries far beneath London, something was changing. Not dramatically, not visibly, just small shifts in probability, threads of fate pulling tighter, the future narrowing toward inevitable collision. The unspeakables felt it, recorded it in their careful notes, watched their instruments register increased instability in temporal markers. Something was coming. Something that would force truth into the open, whether the ministry wanted it or not. They documented, calculated, prepared. And in his office at Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore looked at his own instruments, delicate silver devices that tracked things most wizards didn't know existed, and saw the same patterns. The storm was building. The framework was cracking. The moment of rupture approached. Soon the world would have to choose acknowledge reality or collapse under the weight of convenient lies. He suspected he knew which way it would go. The question was how much damage would be done first. Lucifer stood at his window that night, looking out over the dark grounds. The contract was void. His promise of non-interference released. Technically, he could do anything now. Could unravel Umbridge's authority with a word. Could expose every lie, break every rule, reduce the entire structure to rubble. But he didn't. Because McGonagall was right. This was their system. Their fight, their world. He was just passing through, still, watching children suffer under bureaucratic cruelty while bound by promises he'd made. That had never sat well. The framework was cracking. He could feel it. The same sensation as the Department of Mystery's reality straining against the weight of contradictions. Soon, something would break. And when it did, he'd be ready. Not to interfere. Just to ensure the pieces fell honestly. That seemed fair. Outside the castle breathed. Students slept. Teachers worried. And somewhere in the ministry, Cornelius Fudge refused to see what was right in front of him. The storm was coming. Everyone knew it. The only question was, who would survive the breaking? The vision hit Harry during History of Magic. Not a dream this time. Not something he could dismiss as imagination. This was real. Happening now. Voldemort at the Department of Mysteries. Sirius in danger. The prophecy. Harry was on his feet before he'd fully processed the information, his chair clattering backward. Professor Binns continued droning, oblivious. Everyone else turned to stare. Harry, Hermione's voice came from far away. I have to go. His voice sounded strange, distant. The Department of Mysteries. Sirius. Ron was standing too now. What about Sirius? He's in danger. Voldemort has him. You saw or you dreamed. Hermione's analytical mind was already working, looking for alternative explanations. I saw. Harry grabbed his bag. I'm going, with or without you. The certainty in his voice cut through doubt. Hermione and Ron exchanged a look, then both grabbed their things. We're coming, Ron said simply. They ran. By the time Umbridge intercepted them in the entrance hall, Harry had gathered 5 others. The core of the DA. All of them ready to fight. And where, Umbridge said sweetly, do you think you're going? Harry didn't slow down. Out of my way. I think not. She drew her wand. Behind her, Filch appeared with 3 members of the inquisitorial squad. You're attempting to leave school grounds without permission. That's expulsion, Mr. Potter. I don't care. You should. Her smile was vicious. Because I'm not just expelling you. I'm detaining you, all of you, until the ministry can collect you for questioning about your illegal organization. We don't have time for this. You have exactly as much time as I permit. She gestured sharply. Take them to my office. Use force if necessary. The inquisitorial squad moved forward. Harry raised his wand. Then a voice cut through the tension like a blade. Let them go. Everyone turned. Lucifer stood in a doorway, hands in his pockets, expression mild. Umbridge's face contorted. This doesn't concern you, Morningstar. Actually, it does. He walked forward slowly. Because you're about to do something remarkably stupid, and I'd prefer not to watch. I have full authority to detain rule breakers. You have authority the ministry granted. The ministry you serve so loyally. Lucifer's tone was conversational, almost friendly. Tell me what happens to that authority when the ministry discovers it's been wrong about everything. Umbridge's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? The boy's vision, his connection to Voldemort, the reason he's so desperate to reach the Department of Mysteries. Lucifer looked at Harry, met his eyes. It's real, isn't it? You can feel him, know where he is. Harry nodded, too shocked to speak. Impossible, Umbridge hissed. The Dark Lord is not back, not real, not the reason this entire charade has been necessary. Lucifer's voice hardened. You've built your power on a lie, Professor, and lies have a shelf life. Get out of my way. No. The single word carried absolute finality. These children need to go, right now, and you're going to let them. I will do no such thing. Lucifer took one step closer. Just one. The air around him seemed to compress. Let them go. Something in his voice and his presence made Umbridge falter. Just for a second. Just long enough. "Run," Lucifer said quietly to Harry. They ran. Behind them, Umbridge shrieked orders. The inquisitorial squad gave chase, but corridors twisted. Doors appeared where they shouldn't. The castle itself seemed to be helping. By the time they reached the forbidden forest, there was no pursuit. Thestrals waited as if summoned. Harry mounted one without hesitation. "The Ministry," he told the others. "Department of Mysteries. Now." They flew into gathering darkness, not knowing they were heading toward the moment everything would change. Minerva McGonagall found Lucifer in the entrance hall 20 minutes later. "What did you do?" Her voice was tight. "I delayed her. Bought them time. You interfered. I let children run toward danger instead of being locked in an office while someone they love dies. I can live with that interference." McGonagall's expression flickered. "Sirius Black is at the Department of Mysteries." "I don't know. But the boy believes it. And his belief is based on information he shouldn't have access to unless—" Lucifer paused. "Unless Voldemort is real and active. And exactly what Potter's been saying all along." "Dear God." McGonagall's face had gone pale. "If you know who is there, if this is a trap, then we're about to find out just how wrong the Ministry has been." Lucifer looked toward the doors. "And when we do, Umbridge's authority evaporates like morning fog." McGonagall understood immediately. She built everything on the Ministry's denial. If the denial breaks, she has nothing left. No protection, no power base, just a record of documented abuses and a board already watching her. They stood in silence, waiting, knowing that somewhere in London, truth was about to become unavoidable. It happened at 11:43 p.m. Multiple witnesses, Ministry employees, members of the Wizengamot, and Cornelius Fudge himself. Voldemort appeared in the Ministry atrium, fought Dumbledore, was seen, undeniable, real. The lie died in that moment, gasping, pathetic. By midnight, every major newspaper had the story. Emergency editions, witnesses interviewed. The truth spreading like wildfire through a political structure built on convenient denial. The Daily Prophet's headline would read, "He who must not be named returns." Underneath, Minister Fudge witnesses Dark Lord at Ministry, Potter vindicated. News reached Hogwarts at dawn. Owls flooded the Great Hall. Students grabbed papers reading in stunned silence. Then chaos. Voices overlapping. Fear, vindication, shock. At the staff table, Dumbledore sat calmly reading through reports. McGonagall beside him, her expression carefully neutral. Umbridge's seat was empty. She was in her office when the official letter arrived, carried by a Ministry owl. The seal was broken before the bird had left. "Professor Umbridge, in light of recent events, your position as High Inquisitor is hereby terminated effective immediately. You are to vacate Hogwarts premises by end of day. Failure to comply will result in formal sanctions." Signed, Rufus Scrimgeour, Acting Minister. Fudge had resigned within hours of the incident. The entire Ministry was in upheaval, and Umbridge Fudge's creature, Fudge's enforcer, had lost her patron and her power in one catastrophic night. She read the letter 3 times, then very carefully set it down. Her hands were shaking. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. She'd followed every rule, maintained every procedure, built an unassailable framework of authority. And it had collapsed anyway, not because she'd broken it, because the foundation it rested on, the ministry's denial, had been revealed as fiction. She stood, began gathering her things with mechanical precision, plates, doilies, files, all of it meaningless now. Harry returned to Hogwarts at noon, exhausted and grief-stricken. Sirius was dead, not captured, dead. The prophecy was destroyed. The battle was won. Voldemort's return was confirmed. None of it felt like victory. He walked through corridors that seemed brighter somehow. Students passed him with expressions of relief, sympathy, understanding. The atmosphere had shifted. The oppression had lifted. Umbridge was gone. He knew it before anyone told him. Could feel the absence like air returning to a suffocated room. He found Ron and Hermione in the common room. They didn't speak, just sat together in exhausted silence. Later, Dumbledore would explain everything. The prophecy, the connection, the mission ahead. For now, Harry just sat, letting reality settle, trying to process loss and vindication happening simultaneously. "You were right," Hermione said finally. "All along, you were right. Doesn't feel like it matters. It will. Eventually." She took his hand. "It will." Umbridge left Hogwarts at 4 p.m., carrying a single trunk. She walked through the entrance hall, with her head high, maintaining dignity even in defeat. Students lined the corridors, watching, silent. She reached the main doors, stepped outside. That's when Peeves appeared. The poltergeist had been waiting, planning, salivating over this moment for months. He swooped down with a cackle that echoed across the grounds, wielding Professor McGonagall's walking stick like a club and carrying what appeared to be a sock filled with chalk dust. "Umbridge is leaving! Umbridge is leaving!" he shrieked with demented joy. The first blow caught her shoulder. The second sent her trunk tumbling. The chalk sock exploded in a white cloud. Umbridge shrieked, tried to run. Peeves gave chase, cackling like a madman, swinging the stick with abandon. Out, out, out. The tyrant falls. The pink toad flees. Students flooded to the windows. Laughter rippled through the castle. Not cruel, just the pure release of months of tension. McGonagall stood at her window watching Peeves chase Umbridge down the drive. Her expression was perfectly neutral, professional, except for the faintest smile at the corner of her mouth. "Oh dear," she murmured. "I seem to have misplaced my walking stick. I do hope Peeves returns it when he's finished." Beside her, Dumbledore chuckled quietly. "I suspect he's enjoying himself immensely." "Good." McGonagall's voice was prim. "He's earned it." They watched until Umbridge disappeared beyond the gates, still running. Peeves still cackling in pursuit, then McGonagall turned away, returning to her desk. There was work to do. Students to comfort. A school to help heal. But for one perfect moment, justice had been served. Not through paperwork or procedures. Through a poltergeist with a walking stick and a really excellent sense of timing. Lucifer watched from a different window, saw Peeves chase Umbridge through the gates, saw the students laughing, saw the castle collectively exhale. He'd kept his promise, hadn't interfered beyond buying time, hadn't broken Umbridge himself. The system had done that. The truth had done that. All he'd done was ensure honesty when it mattered most. The framework had broken exactly as he'd predicted. Under its own weight, unable to sustain the contradiction between what it claimed and what it was. Hogwarts would recover. The students would heal. New authority would arrive, better or worse, and the cycle would continue. His work here was finished. He turned from the window, began gathering his few possessions. It was time to find the exit he'd been searching for. Time to return to wherever he'd been before that accidental arrival. There was a knock. Harry Potter stood in the doorway, looking exhausted and young and older than he should be. "You're leaving," Harry said. Not a question. "Yes. Thank you for what you did. The quill, the decrees, stopping Umbridge tonight." Lucifer inclined his head. "You would have found a way regardless." "Maybe, but you made it easier." They stood in silence for a moment. "Why did you help us?" Harry asked finally. "Really?" Lucifer considered the question. Thought about systems and coercion and children being tortured by bureaucracy, about promises and loopholes, and the difference between interference and honesty. "Because someone should," he said finally. "And I was here." Harry absorbed this, then nodded. "Will I see you again?" "I doubt it. I don't usually return to the same place twice." "Then goodbye, and thank you." "Goodbye, Harry Potter. Survive." "That's harder than it looks." Harry left. Lucifer finished packing. By evening he'd found it. The same kind of flaw that had brought him here. A crack in the framework, a door that shouldn't exist. He stepped through without ceremony, back into the spaces between spaces, the quiet places where concepts lived before becoming concrete. Behind him, Hogwarts settled into its new equilibrium. Students slept more peacefully. Teachers breathed more easily. And on a notice board in the entrance hall, someone had posted a new sign. "Educational Decree Number 1, Think for Yourself." Unsigned. But everyone knew who'd written it. The castle approved. Minerva McGonagall sat in her office late that night, writing a final report. The board had requested documentation of Umbridge's departure. She provided it. Clinical, thorough, mentioning nothing about poltergeists or walking sticks. At the bottom she added, "Note visiting scholar L. Morningstar departed school grounds this evening. Forwarding address unknown, research concluded." She sealed the report, sent it off. Then she poured herself a very small glass of whiskey and permitted herself a moment of satisfaction. They'd won. Not cleanly, not perfectly, but won. The framework had broken. Truth had emerged. And Hogwarts had survived. That was enough. Outside, Peeves was singing at the top of his lungs, making up increasingly obscene verses about pink toads and fallen tyrants. McGonagall didn't stop him. Some celebrations deserved to be loud. 3 weeks after Umbridge's departure, Hogwarts felt different. Not healed. Healing took longer than 3 weeks, but lighter. Like a weight had been lifted from the castle's stones themselves. Harry sat by the lake watching the giant squid's tentacles break the surface. Exams were approaching. Summer loomed. And somewhere out there, Voldemort was gathering strength. But today, the sun was warm. The grass was soft. And for a few minutes, he could pretend the war hadn't started yet. Hermione found him there, carrying 2 bottles of butterbeer, smuggled from Hogsmeade. "Thought you might want company," she said, settling beside him. "Thanks." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking butterbeer and watching the water. Finally, Hermione spoke. "Do you think about him, Morningstar?" "Sometimes." Harry turned the bottle in his hands. "Mostly I wonder what he was, who he was." "I've been researching." Of course she had. There's no record of anyone by that name in magical academia. No publications, no institutional affiliations. It's like he didn't exist before he arrived. Maybe he didn't. Hermione looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean..." Harry struggled for words. He felt different. Not just powerful, different. Like he was from somewhere else entirely. Somewhere magic works by different rules. That's not possible. Isn't it? We've seen impossible things, Hermione. Why not one more? She had no answer to that. He helped us, Harry said finally. That's what matters. Not what he was, but what he chose to do. Hermione nodded slowly. The quill, the decrees, giving us time to get to the ministry. She paused. He didn't have to. None of it was his fight. No, but he did it anyway. Why? Harry thought about his last conversation with Lucifer, about the quiet certainty in his voice when he'd said because someone should. Because he could, Harry said, and because no one else was. In the staff room, McGonagall was clearing out the last of Umbridge's administrative changes. Educational decrees came down one by one, consigned to a file marked rescinded, ministry overreach. She worked methodically, restoring Hogwarts to its proper governance structure. Dumbledore appeared in the doorway, watching her work. Satisfying? He asked mildly. Immensely. McGonagall set down another stack of pink parchment. Though I wish it hadn't required a public appearance by you-know-who to achieve. Yes. The cost was high. Dumbledore's expression grew somber. Serious. Fudge's continued incompetence even in resignation. The months of suffering under Dolores's regime. The students survived. Some did more than survive. They resisted, organized, fought back in their own way. He smiled faintly. You taught them that. You and Mr. Morningstar. McGonagall paused in her work. I filed paperwork. I'm still not entirely sure what he did. He made lies difficult to maintain, truth harder to ignore. Dumbledore moved to the window. A valuable gift, even if disruptive. Do you know what he was really? I have suspicions, but no certainties. The headmaster's eyes twinkled. And I find I prefer it that way. Some mysteries are better left mysterious. That's not like you. Perhaps I'm learning. He turned back to her. How are the students truly? McGonagall considered. Shaken, some more than others, Potter especially, but resilient. They've learned things this year that no curriculum could teach. Such as that authority isn't the same as correctness, that systems can fail, that sometimes the right thing means breaking rules. She met his eyes. Dangerous lessons for children? Necessary ones, given what's coming. They fell silent, both thinking about the war ahead, the battles to come, the students who would have to fight them. At least they're prepared, McGonagall said finally. Thanks to the DA, thanks to Potter's teaching, and thanks to a stranger who appeared at precisely the right moment, asked precisely the right questions, and disappeared before anyone could truly understand him. Dumbledore smiled. Curious timing, don't you think? Do you believe he was sent by someone? I believe the universe occasionally provides what's needed when it's needed, whether through design or happy accident. He shrugged. Does it matter? McGonagall thought about that. About Lucifer appearing through a flaw in the Department of Mysteries. About his contract with Umbridge that had seemed pointless until it mattered most. About the way he'd stepped aside the moment his presence was no longer necessary. No, she said finally. I suppose it doesn't. Ron found Harry and Hermione by the lake an hour later. There you are. McGonagall's looking for you, Harry. Something about the DA. Zure. Harry's stomach tightened. Are we in trouble? don't think so. She seemed pleased. They found McGonagall in her office, surrounded by paperwork as usual. But her expression was warmer than Harry had seen in months. "Mr. Potter, Miss Granger, Mr. Weasley." She gestured to chairs. "Please sit." They sat, exchanging nervous glances. "I wanted to speak with you about Dumbledore's army." McGonagall's tone was formal, but not unkind. "Specifically, its future." "Its future?" Hermione asked carefully. "The organization served an important purpose this year. Filled a gap in our defensive curriculum that should never have existed." She paused. "The Board of Governors has asked me to formalize it. Make it an official student organization. With faculty oversight, of course." Harry blinked. "You want to legitimize the DA?" "I want to ensure students have proper defense training. Given current circumstances, that seems rather urgent." McGonagall's expression was grave. "The Ministry has finally acknowledged the Dark Lord's return. War is coming. We need our students prepared." "So we can keep meeting?" Ron sounded amazed. "Officially, with some modifications, adult supervision, safety protocols, integration with the standard curriculum." She looked at Harry. "And you would continue leading it, Mr. Potter, if you're willing." Harry felt something shift in his chest. Recognition. Responsibility. Trust. "Yes," he said. "I'm willing." "Good." McGonagall allowed herself a small smile. "You've proven yourself a capable teacher. Better than some with credentials and experience." Her smile faded. "This will be difficult. Dangerous. You'll be preparing your peers for real combat." "I know." "Do you truly?" She leaned forward. "This isn't practice anymore. This is preparation for war. Some of those students will die, Harry, and you'll have trained them." The weight of it settled over him, heavy, inescapable. "They'll die anyway," Harry said quietly. "Without training, this gives them a chance." McGonagall studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, it does." She straightened. "Very well. We'll discuss details after exams. For now, focus on your studies. And Mr. Potter." "Yes, Professor. Thank you for what you did this year, for standing up when adults failed to." Harry didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They left her office in silence. "Blimey," Ron said finally. "We're official now." "We have a responsibility now," Hermione corrected. "That's different." Harry thought about Lucifer, about the way he'd helped without taking over, about creating space for others to act rather than acting for them. "Yeah," he said, "it is." That night in the room of requirement, Harry stood alone. The space had configured itself as it had for DA meetings. Open floor, practice dummies, bookshelves lining the walls. He walked to one shelf and pulled down a book at random. Advanced Defensive Theory. He flipped it open, scanning pages about shield variations and countercurse protocols. This was his responsibility now. Not secret anymore. Official. Sanctioned. Somehow that made it heavier. "Wondered if I'd find you here." Harry turned. Neville stood in the doorway, looking uncertain but determined. "Just thinking," Harry said. "About next year, the official DA." "Yeah." Neville walked in, looking around the room with something like nostalgia. "This place saved us, you know. Gave us somewhere to be strong when everything else was trying to make us weak. We saved ourselves. I just showed up." You did more than show up. Neville's voice was firm. You believed in us, taught us, made us believe we could fight back. He paused. That stranger, Morningstar, he did the same thing, just in a different way. Harry thought about that. How do you mean, he didn't fight for us, didn't solve our problems? He just made it possible for us to solve them ourselves. Neville smiled slightly, like he knew we could. We just needed someone to clear the obstacles. You think that's what he was doing the whole time? Don't you? Harry considered. The quill losing its bite, the decrees confessing their purpose, the delay that let them reach the ministry. None of it had solved anything. It had just created space, room to breathe, opportunity to act. Yeah, he said. I think maybe he was. Good teacher then. Neville turned to leave, then paused. You are too, Harry. Don't forget that, even when it gets hard. He left. Harry stood alone in the quiet room, holding a book about defense, thinking about teaching and responsibility and the weight of other people's survival. Outside Hogwarts settled into sleep. Tomorrow would bring exams and anxiety and the continuing process of healing from a year of institutional cruelty. But tonight, the castle breathed easy. The oppression had lifted. Truth had won, at least temporarily. And somewhere Harry hoped Lucifer Morningstar was walking through whatever space existed between spaces, satisfied that he'd left things marginally better than he'd found them. That was enough. Sometimes it was more than enough. Epilogue to the epilogue. Far from Hogwarts, in a place without coordinates, Lucifer sat in a borrowed cafe reading a borrowed newspaper from a borrowed reality. The coffee was terrible, the pastry was stale, the atmosphere was perfect. He'd left Hogwarts 3 weeks ago by his reckoning. How much time had passed there, he couldn't say. Time was negotiable in the spaces between. The mission had been accidental. The outcome largely satisfactory. He'd promised non-interference and kept that promise. Technically. The loopholes had been generous, but loopholes were meant to be used. The children had learned. The system had collapsed. The truth had emerged. His presence had accelerated what would have happened anyway. Made it cleaner. Less traumatic, perhaps. Or perhaps he was rationalizing. He'd never been good at leaving things alone when he saw injustice clearly labeled and institutionally sanctioned. A figure slid into the seat across from him. Female. Ancient. Knowing eyes. Interesting detour, she said. Lucifer didn't look up from his paper. I was passing through. You intervened. I enforced a contract. You helped them. I asked questions. They found their own answers. He turned a page. There's a difference. Is there? Her smile was sharp. You've always had trouble with that distinction. Lucifer finally looked up. Met her eyes. They were torturing children with bureaucratic approval. Someone needed to say no. And it had to be you. I was there. She laughed, soft and knowing. You were always there when you wanted to be. Never when you didn't. She stood. Come, we have other places to be, other problems to solve, or not solve as you prefer. Lucifer folded his paper, left coins on the table, followed her toward a door that hadn't existed a moment before. Behind them, the cafe faded. Another borrowed moment returned to wherever borrowed moments came from. And in a castle far away, or perhaps very close, depending on how you measured distance, students slept and dreamed and prepared for battles to come. Some of them would survive. some wouldn't. But they'd all learned something valuable from a year of pink tyranny and quiet resistance. They'd learned that authority wasn't truth, that systems could fail, that sometimes the right thing meant standing alone against overwhelming power. And most importantly, they'd learned that even when no one seemed to be watching, someone might be. Someone who'd ask the questions no one else would. Someone who'd create space for justice to breathe. Even if that someone was just passing through, even if that someone didn't stay. Sometimes that was enough. The lesson endured. The framework had broken. And Hogwarts, scarred but standing, continued its eternal watch over children, learning to be more than what the world expected. That was magic too. The kind that mattered most. The end.